are going to move right into the management strategy evaluation with Dr. Hicks.
Yep, now it's on. Picking me up loud and clear. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you all had a good lunch and are ready for a quick overview of the IPHC Harvest Strategy Policy and Management Strategy Evaluation. All right, figure this out. I want to start off with success. A success in 2025. A harvest strategy policy was adopted by the commissioners at the interim meeting this year or last year. And that's a huge success because the harvest strategy policy is what defines the general approach to managing Pacific halibut. It defines the objectives of the commission, identifies management procedures, describes the inputs, and it outlines rebuilding and all sorts of things. And so it's a really useful overarching document of the general process of managing Pacific halibut. And I think that's a success. As Dr. Stewart talked about, it's actually defined a few things in the assessment process as well and what reference points are. That's all I'll say about that. It is on the IPHC website if you do want to read that or ask me any questions about it. What I want to focus on today is the management strategy evaluation, and management strategy evaluation is the framework and the process that supported the development of the harvest strategy policy. So I want to identify a bit of the work that we did in 2025, including these points here, and then finish off with a potential work plan for 2026. So I'm going to jump into it, and I have it's fortunate for me that Dr. Jensen, Olaf Jensen with the SRB this morning, he actually did a lot of the work for me today. So I'm going to run over these definitions really quick, which he described already. The SRB made a recommendation on a definition for overfishing, which we've adopted in the harvest strategy policy. And that is basically when the annual fishing intensity is higher than the level required to sustain maximum sustainable yield. And as he mentioned, this is very consistent with many different harvest strategy policies around the world, actually. But what I want to do is inform you how this fits into the management process and the decision-making process. So what I've shown here is the top part of the 2026 decision table, a little preview, which Dr. Stewart will present to you shortly. And it shows to you on this decision table, the columns from left to right are increasing fishing intensity. And you see that last column that's not colored red is called the overfishing limit. So if there is a column on the decision table to the right of overfishing limit, that would be considered overfishing by the definition of the harvest strategy policy. And what you'll notice is that Dr. Stewart's not presenting any columns to the right later today, but it's just to inform you how that fits into the decision table. Dr. Jensen already described overfished and depleted for me, which he gave really excellent descriptions of both of those, and I'll give you maybe a little different slant on it. But basically, he described overfished as a relative limit reference point, and an overfished state may be fully mitigated by management actions. On the contrary to that is depleted, which is an absolute limit reference point in spawning biomass. And this is defined as a level below which potential for recovery is uncertain. And that's really important. It's basically describing a level below which we're not certain if the halibut stock can recover quickly and appropriately. This is depleted is affected by management, but also by the productivity of the stock, what's influencing the productivity, the environmental conditions, for example. And so it may not be fully mitigated by management action. It may require a change in the environment or something like that. I just want to note with the footnote there, this footnote's in the harvest strategy policy. Depleted is still a concept we're working on. We have a definition here, and we're going to be developing threshold for it and potential management procedures, how you respond when you're approaching a depleted level, if you are. So there's still some more work to do on that concept. But what I want to do for a third time is show this picture that has been shown by Dr. Jensen and Dr. Stewart. On the left is what I'm calling absolute spawning biomass, and that's the actual biomass of spawners in the water. And the blue line with fishing is what we estimate in the stock assessment as where we currently are with the halibut stock. The black line is the estimated unfished level of spawners or spawning biomass out there that would have occurred if we had not fished on the stock. And as Dr. Stewart pointed out, you can see that changes over time, which is because it's influenced by environmental conditions, recruitment and weighted age mainly. If we take the blue line, divide that by the black line, we get relative spawning biomass on the right, which is a measure of stock status. And so you see we have the relative spawning biomass, and over time, you can see the success of management in this plot is that the relative spawning biomass has been mostly stable and potentially increasing. So if you think about that as stock status, we've been doing good at maintaining a stock status. So what does this mean in terms of overfished? Well, we have an overfished definition in the harvest strategy policy, which states the stock is overfished if it's at 20% or below of relative spawning biomass. And so you see on that rightmost plot, the red dashed line is a horizontal line at 20%. But if we translate that to absolute spawning biomass, being 20% of that black line, you see that overfished definition changes over time. And so overfished is dependent on the environmental conditions or the productivity of the stock. What we had discussions with the SRB and the MSAB about is there a potential level of spawning biomass which might be detrimental to the stock or recovery might be uncertain? So we introduced the additional concept of depleted. And that is, are there just enough spawners in the water such that this stock remains persistent? And so this is the threshold that we want to define, this purple line on the left. And we're going to do that through simulation work, as Dr. Jensen noted this morning as well. But then if you translate that onto relative spawning biomass, you can see the depleted concept actually changes over time. So I like that this, in both absolute spawning biomass and relative spawning biomass, we now have two concepts that are constant on either one of those. And so they're contradictory in that sense. And I think that's very useful for the management of Pacific halibut. So we've talked a lot about productivity of Pacific halibut stock. On those previous slides, you might have known there was a little indication of high and low productivity up there. And when productivity is low, we've really identified that as two major components for this stock: weighted age and average recruitment. So low productivity we could define as a low weighted age, so they don't grow as big for their age, or average recruitment is low. So on average, we just have lower recruitment. And Dr. Stewart's shown similar plots that I'm showing here, with the changes in weighted age over time being, that's the weight at individual ages, each line. And you can see in the early 1970s, fish were growing quite large. Now they're not growing as large. And you can see how the average recruitment is related to the PDO, or the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, where in negative PDO years, it tends to be lower, and in higher PDO years, it tends to be higher. And so the other important part of this is weighted age is currently quite low, and then the PDO has been negative recently, resulting in the low recruitment that we've seen for this stock. So what can we do in the management strategy evaluation process in trying to understand the effects of productivity on the management of this stock? So what management strategy evaluation does is it projects a long time into the future. We're showing, I think, 70-year projections here, 60 or 70 years. And it projects that many years consistently managing the stock as according to the harvest strategy policy. And what you can see is when you introduce variability in the environment, you get this purple line and purple band. And so there's a lot of variability in the population. You might get a good recruitment leading to an increase in spawning biomass and increases in the TCY. You might get a series of small recruitments resulting in low TCYs and a low spawning biomass. So that's okay in management strategy evaluation. We want to characterize that variability and that uncertainty and find the best ways to manage given that uncertainty. However, what we can do is begin to understand how productivity affects the spawning biomass, the TCY, or whatever it is we can predict from these simulations. So what we've done on this plot is we've overlaid onto it an assumption that the productivity of the Pacific halibut remains low. It remains similar to what we've seen in the last decade. And that is the green line there. So you can see there's a lot less variability because we're assuming the environment's doing one thing. So that's why the green band is a lot smaller. But what you notice is the dashed green lines is the median, so 50% of simulations above, 50% below. That green dashed line indicates where we predict the spawning biomass would sort of be if we harvested at an SPR, or fishing intensity, of 43%. And what you can see is it remains on the low end of that spectrum. That's what we would expect under low productivity, but now we can begin to understand, oh, this is how low productivity is affecting the stock. This is what we might expect if we don't get out of the current regime that we're in. So the MSAB thought that these trace plots are useful. They really liked them, and we're working on ways to improve them with their feedback, of course. And they also made a note from an info session we had that they thought that these might be useful in the commission decision-making process. So I presented it here, and hopefully it is helpful. There's some other plots that I'm happy to point you to if you want to see other SPR values, for example. Okay, so we have now a little bit of understanding that we're in a low productivity regime that has consequences. It means that we've had low average recruitment. But in the harvest strategy policy, we've actually been working on this for years, and it's defined as a fishing intensity of 43%. The MSAB, a couple of MSAB meetings ago, they recommended changing the fishing intensity to an SPR 46%. Quoting a lower fishing intensity would reduce the probability that the spawning biomass is less than the 2023 spawning biomass. So they had one concern about going lower than we're currently at. They want to keep the spawning biomass above where we're currently at. It's obviously a hardship for some people. So they're like, let's avoid this. And they also noted that fishing at a constant fishing intensity of 46% reduces the changes from year to year in the TCEY. Another point to make is that recent mortality limits have been associated with SPRs around 51%. So that's even a lower fishing intensity. So a lot of people have been asking me, we adopted this harvest strategy policy, but we're not following it. We're fishing at lower fishing intensities than what's defined in the harvest strategy policy. And that is fine. It's defined in the harvest strategy policy that there's a decision-making process, and the commission will take in other management supporting information to meet other objectives not defined in the harvest strategy policy. Those could be economic objectives or anything else. So the commission has also expressed interest in learning more about these low productivity scenarios, and what does that mean on the fishing intensity in particular? And I want to note, in case you're thinking, well, the harvest strategy policy is adopted, we have this SPR 43%. Well, it also states in the harvest strategy policy that as new information comes to light, as new science comes around, that we have the opportunity to update that harvest strategy policy so that we are considering the most recent information. So let's take a look at a trade-off at different fishing intensities in the MSE simulations, and this is a real common way to evaluate different management procedures. So here we're thinking of management procedure as a fishing intensity. If we focus first on the black line, we have different fishing intensities indicating on the vertical or y-axis the variability in TCEY. And what that means is how much the TCEY might change from year to year. Is it 30 and then 45 and then 20 and then, that's a lot of variability that we probably don't want. So basically lower is better on that vertical y-axis. On the x or horizontal axis, we have the actual TCEY, the mortality limit, how much the coastwide, all the different fisheries are allowed to take from the water. And of course there, higher is better, right? We want higher TCEYs, but we don't want them changing a lot from year to year. So we can then look across, say, that black line, and where we have the highest mortality limit and the lowest variability is probably the most optimal area. So we think about this as optimal management. And really, when you think about it, it probably occurs between SPR values of 43% and 52%. And that black line is integrating over high and low productivity scenarios. So that's capturing all that variability. And you can see that it's higher than when we simulate only a low productivity scenario. And the low productivity scenario is the green line. And of course, your TCY is going to be smaller. You have less productivity feeding into the stock. But the variability, that change in that curvature is not much different. So the optimal fishing intensity is still between 43 and 52%. It's just occurring at different values. So that's the way we evaluate MSE results, is really we're looking at optimizing the management. We go to Dr. Stewart when we want to figure out the actual values. But really the outcome here is that the productivity has little effect on the optimal SPR. But let's take a closer look and dive into what we call performance metrics, which are related to the objectives of the commission. We have two tables here. The top is integrating over low and high productivity. The bottom is low productivity only. The top four rows there with the two Ps and then the median TCY and the AAV, those are the priority objectives of the commission. Probability that the relative spawning biomass is less than some value. And then the TCY and the AAV, which we saw on the previous slide. AAV is variability. And what you can see, if a cell is colored red, it does not meet that objective. If a cell is colored green, it does meet that objective. If a cell is colored gray, it means we just evaluate trade-offs with that objective. We don't have a definition of if it's met or not met. So with low productivity, you can see an SPR 40% actually reduces relative spawning biomass to a level below what is the acceptable objective of the commission. So really, we can take that off the table if we're in a low productivity regime. And then the other thing is the TCY and the AAV I presented on the previous slide, but I've added a fifth performance metric here, and that's the short-term probability that the spawning biomass is less than the spawning biomass estimated in 2023. You can think of that as what's the probability that the spawning biomass is going to be less than it was that we've seen recently. And I'm just going to advance it here real quick because this is where a real difference occurs between the two regimes. If we integrate over low and high productivity, there's about a 1 in 3 chance. If we just assume we're always going to be in a low productivity regime, there's actually a 1 in 2 chance fishing at a 43% or 46% SPR fishing intensity. So that's as expected. In lower productivity, you expect that spawning biomass to go smaller. So we can use this as an example of figuring out our risks and what sort of risks do we want to take. However, when we develop the harvest strategy policy, we use that top table because we don't know what's going to happen in the future. We don't know if it's going to remain low all the time or we are going to get some high productivity. So we're capturing all the variability with that top table. So one outcome we've started producing for the commission is the harvest strategy policy table. And this is formatted in the same columns that are in the decision table. And then with the priority performance metrics or priority objectives, performance metrics related to them, shown in bold on the rows, and then some additional performance metrics which might be of interest shown in not bold. And what you can see is we go from low fishing intensity on the left to high fishing intensity on the right. Same columns presented in the decision table that Dr. Stewart will present next. And it just provides some more long-term, beyond the 3-year projections and probabilities related to these objectives. So this might be useful for decision makers and stakeholders to better understand sort of the consequences of fishing at these different levels. One key difference between this and the decision table that Dr. Stewart will present is here I'm holding the fishing intensity, the SPR constant, whereas Dr. Stewart holds the actual mortality limit constant. And he's only projecting 3 years. I have a longer term thinking, and I'm projecting out to 60 years. So that's a real brief summary of the work that we did along with the MSAB in 2025. And there's still a lot more work to do. So I've put together a proposal for a work plan and the MSE work plan here in 2026. indicating what we'd like to get accomplished in the winter and spring before the MSAB and SRB meetings, and then what we'd like to accomplish in the summer and fall before the annual meeting 103. And what you can see, there's some technical stuff, updating the operating model or OM and improving the estimation model. And that's coming out of the SRB. And also we have this 3-year cycle where following a full stock assessment, we recondition the operating model to make sure it's consistent with the stock assessment. So there's some tidy work to do there. We want to reevaluate the existing MPs and make sure that everything is consistent or understand how it might change, which I believe it'll probably be consistent. Further develop depleted concept and investigate productivity regimes. Those are all high priority items that the MSAB has identified, as well as the SRB. And then in the summer and fall, after we have the MSAB and SRB meetings, there should out of those come some recommendations on additional management procedures to investigate, what sort of reference points we want to determine, like the threshold for depleted, and developing guidance documents for the harvest strategy policy. Those are supporting documents for that. And then potentially update the harvest strategy policy with anything that is new that we learn. So with that, there's a paper associated with this presentation. Commission would like the commission to note that paper. And then also if the commission may consider the proposal for a 2026 MSE work plan as presented on the previous slide. And with that, I can take any questions.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Hicks. Any questions? Commissioner Davis.
Thank you, Dr. Hicks. So I'm thinking about the MSAB's recommendation for FSPR 46 instead of 43, and I'm looking at the work plan. I'm wondering, in your view, are some of the things, let's say, well, I guess all of it, will that bring further info to bear on the question of the FSPR that, we might, to inform that decision?
Yes, the work plan is designed to really get at this question. I think this is a high priority question of the commission. What is the appropriate fishing intensity, and should we modify the harvest strategy policy, update it to reflect whatever we learn from that? So that would be a priority outcome of the work plan, would be informing this decision for the commission.
Okay, so if I understand that right, maybe we are expecting that there will be these individual pieces of work, and out of that, perhaps when we meet again next year, you're going to sort of attempt to synthesize, given all of these additional analyses we've done on these different topics that are in the work plan. Here's our kind of updated assessment of the implications of selecting an FSPR of 43 or 46 or something else.
Yes, that is the plan. We'll see when we get to the end of the year next year, if there's additional information that the commission would desire, then we would go away and work with the different subsidiary bodies to make sure that, but we will come back with information that will inform that decision on a fishing intensity.
Okay, thank you.
And just to build on that back and forth there, do I understand correctly that the idea would be for the work plan that the group would look at moving to 46, but perhaps not limit the inquiry to that? So conceivably, it could come back with a recommendation of 45 or 47, something different from that. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. And in the MSAB presentation this morning, the MSAB has already identified a range of SPR values that it felt was important to investigate. And so we'll start with those MSAB recommendations, begin with those, and then start honing in on, what the optimal solution is and what the difference is between those different SPR values.
Yeah, great, thanks. Other questions? Okay, not seeing any more. Thank you, Dr. Hicks.
Thank you.
I think that brings us back to Dr. Stewart for the harvest decision table.
Good afternoon. This will be a much shorter presentation than I gave this morning, and it will takes the results from the stock assessment and now looks forward over the next 3 years to evaluate where we may be at the end of that 3-year time period. So as we've done in the past, the projections in the harvest decision table for 2026 include, as Dr. Hicks mentioned, projecting a constant TCEY over the next 3 years. Importantly, within these projections, we implement all the catch sharing plans and agreements that occur up and down the coast. The basis for the projections for things that are outside the catch sharing plans, for example, non-directed discard mortality or bycatch, as of 2019, the Commission opted to use a 3-year moving average to project forward for bycatch. So that's what's done in these projections. We also use the previous year's estimates for subsistence and unguided recreational mortality in the places where those are delineated and or present. So with those as the ground rules for the projections, we include a range of different mortality levels, and you actually got a snapshot of that through the headers in Dr. Hicks' presentation, ranging from no fishing to values above and below the status quo, including also the 3-year surplus, F43 reference level, an F40 maximum economic yield proxy, and our F35 maximum sustainable yield proxy, or now as part of the HSP, our overfishing limit. So all of those are provided in the decision table. For each of these, we calculate a range of different risk metrics, and I'll speak a little bit more to each of those as we go through the presentation. To orient you to the decision table, across the top of the table are the various management alternatives. And so they range from yields of low values on the left to high values on the right. Down the left-hand side of the table are the various risk metrics that are being reported. And then within the table are the estimated risks reported as a times out of 100, or a probability of a given risk occurring. So what I'll do, instead of going through a bunch of numbers on the table, I'll give you some graphics showing the 3-year projections under several different columns out of this table, ranging from the left-hand side all the way across to the right. And I'll highlight a few of the key risk metrics for each of those. And then I'll circle back to the full decision table. So the first projection over 3 years here, in the blue, this is the results from the stock assessment, same as the figure that I showed you earlier, only without the previous stock assessments included on it. And at the end of that time period, that purplish color represents the 3-year projection. This first projection shows you the 3-year values for no fishing mortality. So this is no fishing from any sources. The TCEY, all sources of fishing mortality are 0, corresponds to an SPR of 100%. And the takeaway from this one, we include this one every year because it's a way to visualize what's the maximum level of productivity we could get out of the stock given the fish that are already in the water. So right now we have essentially 3-year classes in the water. And if we let them grow and don't touch them for 3 years, you can see here that we will get back to somewhere around the biomass levels that we had in 2016 or 17. And that is essentially the best the stock can do given the fish that we have sitting in the water right now. For each of these projections, I will then show you a series of different risk metrics, and these correspond to the probability of decreased spawning biomass, either in a 1 or 3-year time horizon, the probability of dropping below that B30% reference point, the probability of fishery decline, and here I'm just pulling 1-year fishery decline out, but the decision table includes other metrics there as well, the probability of exceeding F43, the reference level, and the probability of exceeding F35%, which is the overfishing limit. Now this one's not very interesting because we're not fishing at all, so there's no probability of exceeding those limits, for example. Now you may notice that even with no fishing, the probability of dropping below our SB 30% reference point is still 24 out of 100. So there is a chance that we could drop over 3 years, or over 1 year, we could drop below that reference point. And you might be thinking, well, we're not fishing, how could that happen? Well, the explanation is that there's a probability that we are already below that reference point. So the graphic that I showed you earlier, the interval around our current status extended below that B30% reference point. And so this represents the case where even if we're not fishing, there's a chance that moving forward, we're starting out below that reference point and we could continue below that reference point. So the next projection will be at the status quo minus 10%. So this would put us at a coastwide TCEY of just under 27 million pounds. And now you can start to see that there are risks associated with this projection. Those are all larger than they were in the previous graphic. And just visually, you can see that we've flattened that trend out somewhat. So by taking 27 million pounds out of the stock over the next 3 years, at the end of that 3-year time period, although we are projected to be at a higher biomass level than we are today, it is definitely not going to be as high as it would be under no fishing whatsoever. And so now you're starting to see the effect of fishing on this 3-year projection. Moving across the decision table to the right now at a value which is the status quo, which is a coastwide TCEY of just under 30 million pounds. Again, you can see those various risk metrics beginning to increase. We are now at a 15 out of 100 chance of stock decline over a 1-year time period and an 18 out of 100 chance of stock decline over a 3-year time period. You see at the very bottom, the last row there, the chance that a TCEY of 29.72 million pounds would be exceeding our overfishing limit is only 2 out of 100. So it's still appreciably below that overfishing definition. Moving up then to the status quo plus 10%, this would be a coastwide TCEY of just under 33 million pounds. Again, you can see those risk metrics moving up as we increase the yield out of the stock. You can also see that the trajectory of the stock is flattening, continuing to flatten over the next 3 years. Now, the next projection is the 3-year surplus. It also corresponds to our reference level SPR of 43%. This is just by chance this year. These don't have to be the same projection. In most years, these would differ. It turns out that this year, the 3-year surplus and the F43 do line up on the same coastwide TCEY, which is just under 39 million pounds. Now, the definition of the 3-year surplus is that we would have a 50-50 chance of being above or below where we are now at the end of a 3-year time horizon. And it's a little hard to see from the back of the room, I'm sure. But what that means is because we have 2 young year classes in the water right now, if we harvest at a level that will end us up with a 50-50 chance of ending at the same place we're starting, the stock trend is actually going to be different at the end of that time period. So right now, the stock is trending slightly upward. And if we harvest at the full surplus, the stock is actually going to be trending slightly downward at the end of the 3-year projection because we will have effectively caught all the production out of the 2016 and 17 year classes above and beyond replacement level. So that's how you would interpret that. And that's why I've underlined that second row of the risk metric, because that is the definition of the 3-year surplus. The bottom row, the second to last row, of the probability of exceeding our F43 reference level, I've also underlined that because that's also 50 out of 100. And so that's by definition, that's why this is the reference TCY. Again, that is just coincidence that those line up this year. They don't necessarily line up. The last projection I'll show is our MSY or overfishing proxy. So this would correspond to a much larger TCEY than we've had in recent years, just under 52 million pounds. This is an SPR of 35%. So this would be equivalent to the maximum level of fishing intensity we could expect to exert on this stock over the long term. And at that level, we would project almost certainly the stock will be declining. There's a 91 out of 100 chance that at the end of 3 years will be below where we are right now. I've underlined that last risk metric there, the probability of exceeding F35%, and that's 50 out of 100 by definition, because that is what this run represents. So that's a range of different projections from the left side of the decision table all the way across to the right-hand side. Now, to show you that decision table, you've already seen the headers in Dr. Hicks' presentation. Again, the far right-hand column is that overfishing limit. There are other additional alternatives here. Status quo plus or minus 5% is included. I just didn't show them all graphically. And the last thing I'll highlight is the very bottom row of this table is actually new since the interim meeting, which is the probability that the fishing intensity is higher than the overfishing reference or overfishing limit defined in the harvest strategy policy. And you can see that all of those values are below or equal to 50% because we've anchored this table on the right with the overfishing column. So by definition, anything to the left of that has to have a lower than 50% chance of overfishing occurring during that time period. And again, we've added this because that's now part of our harvest strategy policy. So to summarize the projection and to recap a few things from the stock assessment, the poor recruitment we've seen since 2006 and the continued low weighted age are what are limiting our 3-year yields. Even if we see a strong year class coming in 2018, 19, or 20, our yields in the next 3 years are still going to be largely limited by the fish that are already in the water. And I'm not trying to make a projection beyond that 3-year time period, because starting in the 4th and 5th years, we're going to start to have fish that are reaching maturity and affecting these projections that we haven't yet got a good read on in the water with actual data. These projections, importantly, include the rapidly maturing 2016 and 17 year classes. So we've made a lot of discussion about those today. They are definitely included, and we're counting on those fish over the next 3 years. Some things that are not included in these projections in the decision table is the general risk that we are at or near historically low spawning biomass levels. And although we haven't identified this as being in what Dr. Hicks presented to you as a depleted state, there is some risk of going outside the envelope of stock sizes that we've seen before. In addition, we are seeing risk associated with the continued low catch rates, risk to our survey design and the financial viability of the survey, and risks to various components of the directed commercial fishery that I think we can see as part of the lack of ability to catch the full TCEYs in some places, in some cases. Finally, the last risk here is kind of just a general concept, which is that, as came up in questions earlier, we don't fully understand the processes driving weighted age and recruitment for Pacific halibut. And because of that, because we can't put our finger on why these things are currently low, there's a risk associated with just being in this low state. If we could predict them and say, under these conditions, this is where we would expect things to start turning around, I think that would reduce the risk of perhaps not being able to identify how and when and what we might need to do to move forward out of this case. It could well be that we are just in a state of low productivity moving forward, and it's unknown at what point we may or may not move out of that. This slide just reports to you the recent adopted TCEYs. A few years ago, the Commission asked for these to be easily accessible during this presentation for comparison as discussions and consideration of TCEYs coming up arise. So these are the actual adopted TCEYs going back to 2013. We can also add to that the coastwide reference TCEYs from each of the years, noting that the IPHC's management procedure was a draft, and then it was an interim management procedure, and now it's finally a fully fledged harvest strategy policy. It's changed over time from what used to be the blue line to an F46 policy to now an F43 policy continuing to 2026. So that reports the reference levels associated with those calculations. And the last thing I want to identify here, and this was unavailable at the interim meeting because of the time of the calendar year we were in, is that the mortality projection tool for 2026 is now available on the website. There's a link here. You can also find it through the quick links on our website. There's an informational paper. Information paper 2 describes this tool and what you might find there. Importantly, this tool provides the ability to look at detailed mortality projections by individual area and by fishery sector. So if you want to see, well, what does this look like within a particular area, this is the tool to use. There are currently no reference distribution procedures established in the harvest strategy policy. So when you open the tool, you will see that there's nothing specified. You have to put your own values in and evaluate whatever alternative you'd like to see. And with regard to that, I would encourage you to consider 2 ways to use the tool. So the first way is if you're interested in looking at the distribution of coastwide mortality across all the various regulatory areas. As the tool was designed, you put in a coastwide TCEY, you assign a percentage to each area, and then you can see how that breaks down within each area. Now, I realize that not everybody's going to be concerned with all regulatory areas. And so if you really just want to see, well, how does the catch sharing plan break out a TCEY within my area and only look at a single area at a time, it's a little awkward to do that via percentages. So what I would encourage you to do is to put in the TCEY for the area you're interested in as the coastwide total and put 100% of it in the area you're interested in, and then just look at that one area and ignore all the other areas. areas. And that's a quick way to use the tool just to evaluate what is the catch sharing plan, or how is it going to break out in my particular area. I and others on the staff will be available to help people use the tool as needed this week. Similarly, as we've done at previous meetings, we provide this summary, but we're also available to provide any additional harvest decision tables, alternatives that might be needed during this week at the meeting for decision making, as well as any detailed mortality projections within or outside the tool on request during this week. So contact me or others on the staff if you need help with any of this or you need additional material. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Hicks. Questions? No, I have one for you, Ian. Can you pull up the decision table, please? So in the top row, the stock transponding biomass 1 year less than the current year. Am I remembering correctly? It seems like in past years, there's been kind of more variance in those percentages as you move from one column to the next, that they seem more similar this year. Do I have that right? And if so, why?
Thanks for the question. So there are a couple things going on here. One is that over the years, we have included a different range of alternatives in this table. So in some years, I mean, we have from 0 on the left, no fishing, that's a less than 1% chance of stock decline, all the way up to the overfishing limit, which is an 80% chance of decline. So we have a pretty broad range there. But the focused zone in the middle here, I think you're probably right. It does correspond to perhaps a smaller range of probabilities, but I think it's also perhaps a smaller range of actual harvests as well. As the commission's brought the harvest down, the status quo at 29, just under 30 million pounds, plus or minus 10% is a pretty small range. And so I think that part of what you're seeing is just that there's really not perhaps as big a difference in the absolute level of harvest across the core of the table as we might have seen in some years.
Yeah, I think you put your finger on it. Okay, thanks. That's helpful. Any other questions? I don't think so. Thanks.
Thank you.
Should we jump into FIS design evaluations?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And so Dr. Webster's going to present that, and then this relates to paper 13.
Good afternoon. Yes, I'll be reviewing the evaluation of designs for the FIS, and with a particular focus on the 2026 FIS, but also looking at potential designs for the next couple of years. And starting with, let's see if that one works. Starting with a summary. So the optimal long-term design, FIS design, which we call the base block design, which was mentioned earlier in the day, is not financially viable for 2026, with a projected loss of $1 million. At the most recent interim meeting, the Commission adopted a more cost-effective alternative called the supplemented reduced loss design, with a projected loss of close to $500,000 US. And there's the relevant paragraph from the interim meeting report. And I will be going into these designs in more detail in this presentation. So the FIS, you've heard a lot about already, our most important source of data on Pacific halibut, provides data for estimating our indices of density and abundance, which we use to estimate stock trends, distribution, and provide an important input into the assessment. Also provides biological data for the assessment, and we've had an annual FIS since 1993. The design was expanded over 2 periods in the early years, from 93 to 2000, to include sampling in all areas. And we had further expansion more recently into previously unsampled waters during the 2011 to 2019 period. The orange spots here represent the full FIS grid of 1,890 stations on a 10 by 10 nautical mile grid in waters of depths 18 to 732 meters or 10 to 400 fathoms. And these data are typically augmented, as mentioned this morning, by data from trawl surveys, in particular the NOAA trawl survey indicated in red here. For an overview of how we've been sampling the FIS in recent years, this shows each station on the FIS grid by its most recent sampling year. So the most recently sampled stations are in yellow, then a couple of years back in orange, and so on. So the darker the color, the further back into the past we've sampled. As you can see that the distribution of sampling has been quite patchy in recent years, with some areas being sampled quite recently, others not having been sampled for quite some time. In particular, there are large parts of areas 2A, 4A, and 4B, and part of 4CD that haven't been sampled for 4 or 5 years or more. The objectives and design layers. So the primary objective is the science objective, sample the stock for assessment and distribution. That determines our station distribution, the number of stations, and how many skates per station. And then we also consider cost effectiveness without compromising the integrity of the scientific integrity. And balancing operational feasibility and logistics, cost and revenue, scientific needs, and includes an aspirational target reserve, which I learned this week has been updated to $4 million for the FIS. And then we have some tertiary objectives that I won't go into. So the base block design, consider the optimal long-term FIS design in terms of balancing scientific needs and cost effectiveness. And we refer to it in this presentation as option 1. It prioritizes some annual sampling in each biological region for assessment purposes and ensures that all charter regions in the core of the stock, which is 2B, 2C, 3A, and 3B, are sampled over a 3-year period. Coverage in other areas is prioritized to minimize potential for bias and maintain precise estimates. And the sampled blocks, charter regions in the core, are rotated over time. So this is this was our proposal for the base block design for the next 3 years, 2026 to 2028. And you can see that, again, coverage is not comprehensive, but over the 3-year period, as shown in these three maps, we have complete coverage of areas 2B, 2C, 3A, and 3B, and a fairly substantial coverage over other areas. Any stations not sampled in these 3 years will be sampled in subsequent years. So for the cost evaluation that we undertook to compare designs, the cost of different designs, we assumed that the designs were optimized for the number of skates with 4, 6, or 8 skate sets used, depending on projected catch rates and bait costs. That Pacific halibut price would decline by 10% from 2025 values, given that it increased approximately 30% from 2024 to 2025. This is a little bit conservative, perhaps, but not unrealistic. And Pacific halibut landings will decline by 5% from 2025 values. And the price of chum salmon bait increases to $2.50 a pound from $1.65 per pound in 2025. And the revenue projections include the $513,000 voluntary contribution from the USA that we have already received to support the FIS. It's the base block design, but larger this time for 2026. And showing the distribution of stations, I'll note that we have a small number of optional stations in 4B, in the eastern part of 4B. Those are stations that we had planned to fish in 2025 and for logistical reasons could not be fished and are expected to present ongoing difficulties in fishing those. So to make it a little more attractive perhaps for people to bid on 4B, those stations are considered optional. We'd love for them to be sampled, but if the folks bidding on that region consider that unfeasible, then those are optional. Projected net revenue for this design for 2026 is a loss of $1.155 million US, with an income projected of $2.345 and expenses of $3.5 million. So because of the high operating loss of that design, we considered, which would require additional supplementary funding to be viable, the Commission adopted a different design, the supplemented reduced loss design at the interim meeting, as noted earlier, with a projected net operating loss of close to $500,000, and again, the revenue supplemented by that US contribution. So option 2 differs from option 1 as follows. It replaces one revenue negative charter region in 2B with 2 regions projected to be revenue positive, adds 1 revenue positive region to 2C, replaces 3 high-cost regions in 3A with 2 regions that ensure projected overall losses are maintained close to that $0.5 million value, and has 1 fewer charter region in 3B. And it looks like this. Still has a similar number of stations, actually slightly more stations than the base block design, but the distribution of stations is different from the base block design, with some stations that were fished in 2025 being repeated again this year, whereas they otherwise might not have been such a high priority because of their recent sampling. And the projected net revenue is a loss of $502,000 US, income $3.134 million, and expenses of $3.636. And this detail provides more detail on the income and expenses, breaking it down a little bit further. That's available for you to review. So option 2, as I mentioned, prioritizes some regions that have been fished recently over others that were included in the base block design because they lacked recent sampling. And this helps ensure cost effectiveness. It reduces the spatial coverage in region 3 over the combined 2025-26 period, given that some charter regions have fished twice over that period. And that increases the chance of bias in estimates for that region, because now we have some parts of those areas that have not been sampled for, will not be sampled for 3 years. Nevertheless, option 2 represents a substantial improvement in coverage over the 2025 FIS that you saw described this morning, and complements the 2025 design by including 7 charter regions not sampled. That should be last year now, not sampled in 2025. 2 each in 2B and 2C, 1 in 3A and 3B, and 1 in 4A. Compared with 24 and 25, option 2 will result in more representative biological data, more precise indices of abundance and stock distribution, and an assessment model that's less reliant on commercial data. Okay, so here's a side-by-side comparison to make it a little easier for your eye to scan back and forth and see the differences between the 2 designs. And those differences are not small. You can see in particular, I don't know if this is, 3A, quite a large difference in where the stations lie, and also in particular 2B as well. And I hit the wrong button. Whatever. Oh, come back. Okay, fine. And this details potential modular changes to those 2 designs if funding became available. Each of these charter regions, the first 2 rows represent the base block and the supplemented reduced loss design, showing which number of charter regions per area that be fished, and the financial values that I've shown already. And then these are other charter regions in a rough order of scientific priority that could be added if more funding was allocated to do that. And that includes regions in 3B, 3A, changes in 3A, 2B, and 2C. And just for reference, this shows a map of where those charter regions are, so you can go back and forth between slides. And And we also put together a series of modular add-ons to either of those designs. So these are not charter regions that are included in either base block or the supplemented reduced loss design, but may be worth considering depending on the priorities of the commission. So they include 4CDE, 4B, 2A, and different options for 2A. And this is a map showing where those different options are located. So outside of the core of the stock, but these are areas that are not part of the base block, regions that are not part of the base block or the supplemented reduced loss. And this, just a recommendation that the commission note the paper and including the approved supplemented reduced loss design. And I will jump now to an additional slide because there's been some discussion about adding a particular charter region to the design. That's Goose Island and 2B. So I'll preempt any questions from the commissioners by presenting this now. So the first two rows you've already seen. The third row is if option 6, which was adding Goose Island and 2B to option 2, the supplemented reduced loss design, would increase the projected loss from $502,000 to $608,000 with the subsequent changes in expenses and income listed there. Goose Island on its own would add 57 stations to the design, resulting in an additional $244,000 of expenses, but and also offsets somewhat by $138,000 of revenue for that change of $106,000. And with that, I'll take questions.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Webster. Questions? Commissioner DeGrief.
Thanks, Dr. Webster. I'm just looking at slide 15, which kind of does the comparison of what the base block design as compared to the supplemental reduced loss design. And just in light of the comment that Dr. Stewart made about the risk and bias, and particularly 3A, I'm just wondering how best to reduce that risk of bias. Which is better, the base block or the supplemental reduced loss? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Commissioner DeGrief. The base block would be better because it's complementary to what we sampled in 2025. So over a short period, we would have most of IPHC regulatory area 3A sampled from 2025 to 2026. That area in those stations in purple in the Central Gulf around Prince William Sound and Yakutat, we fished in 2025. The supplemented reduced loss design, in order to make it more cost effective, fishes them again in 2026 with instead the regions of, I believe, Shelikoff and Gore Point in Western 3A omitted instead. Both designs include the region of Seward, which was not fished in 2024. But yeah, to answer your question, the base block design is complementary to what we fished in 2025. And so we would have recent data from a much larger number of stations in 3A than if we fish the supplemented reduced loss design, but it comes at a cost.
Okay, thank you.
Ray, do we have a direct cost comparison for just that change? If 3A were...
We do. That is in my list. It's in parts. So this is a replacement of so it's options 4 and 5 combined. So replacing Prince William Sound, which we fished in 2025, with Gore Point, which we haven't fished since 2023, would add projected to add $64,000 to the net revenue. Sorry, reduce the net revenue by a further $64,000, Replacing Yakutat with fair weather. We fished Yakutat in 25, haven't fished fair weather since 2023, would reduce net revenue by another $102,000. So combined $166,000 reduction in net revenue.
Okay, thanks. Commissioner Alverson.
Dr. Webster, could you go back to the previous slide? Where it had the base block? Yeah. So is the only difference here is that option 2 is just, if next year we were to play off of this option 2, wouldn't that just become a new base block design? Is the only reason option 1 is preferable is that it is complementary to the year before?
Right. And so thank you for the question, Commissioner Alverson. You'll be making management decisions based on whatever we fish in 2026. So if we're fishing a design in 2026 that includes areas that haven't been sampled for 3 years, the chance of bias in those areas, because we don't have recent data, is increasing with time. So that western part of 3A, you won't have recent information informing our understanding of the stock. Now that can be corrected to some degree when we fish in 2027 by having a version of the base block design that accounts for option 2, that we actually fished option 2 and not option 1 in 2026. And so by the time 2027 comes around, you'll have better information, but that's not helpful at the end of 2026.
I think I got some of that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thanks, Dr. Webster. How about if we go ahead and hear from Dr. Planis and then take a short break?
Good afternoon. My name is Josep Planas. I'm the manager of the Biological and Ecosystem Science branch. The Biological and Ecosystem Science research is intended to provide key inputs into stock assessment and management strategy evaluation, as well as providing a basic and applied understanding of Pacific halibut. The research activities are contemplated within the current program of integrated research and monitoring from 2022 to 2026. Within this plan, there are 5 main research areas that the IPHC Secretariat is working on. The first one is migration and population dynamics. The second one is reproduction. The third one is growth. The fourth is mortality and survival assessment. And the fifth one is fishing technology. Today, for the sake of time, I will be focusing only on the first 2 areas, migration and population dynamics and reproduction, mostly because those 2 areas have provided key inputs for stock assessment in 2025. However, for the other areas, including these 2, we have posters that will be on display that will provide additional information on topics that I'm not going to be mentioning in the presentation that are obviously included in the document. For reference, that's document 14. And those posters will be displayed during the IPHC reception later tonight and during the rest of the week. Tomorrow we'll be in front of the reception area. I'm sorry, in front of the registration area, most likely. So please find me and I'll be more than happy to run you through some of those posters, particularly for topics that are not covered here. So let me start with the first research area, and that is the area of migration and population dynamics. Here under the column in the center, the lettering is a little small. I'm not sure if you can actually see it well, but at the very bottom of this column, there's one project that I will not make a specific mention of it, but was noted by Professor Jensen this morning during his report of the SRB, and that's the development of epigenetic clock for aging. This is a project that is ongoing. We started it in early 2025. We've been working on it for just over a year. The project is still underway. It's a project that is partially funded by Alaska Sea Grant and in collaboration with Alaska Pacific University. And we're currently processing the data. So we don't have any results yet to present, but we hope to be able to present the first results to the Scientific Review Board this year. And then hopefully useful and meaningful results in the next annual meeting. The focus of this research area over the last few years has really been the establishment of a baseline of genetic diversity and the delineation of fine-scale stock structure. So the importance of this work for stock assessment is really to determine whether there's a need for separate assessments for certain components of the stock, and whether there's a need for a potential revision of the structure in future stock assessments. So some years ago, with funding from the North Pacific Research Board, we embarked on a large project that had its main objective to resolve the genetic structure of the Pacific halibut stock in IPHC conventional waters. I presented some of this preliminary data last year at annual meeting 101. And I'll just run again through the samples that we've been working with, because these are samples that have been collected in the winter from spawning groups in 5 different geographic areas within IPHC conventional waters. If you go from east to west, we have samples, genetic samples that were collected in British Columbia, south and north of Haida Gwaii in the years 1999, 2004, and 2007, in the central Gulf of Alaska, in the Portlock region, in the years 1999, 2004, 2007, and 2018. Then in the Bering Sea, in the Bering Sea canyons, in the years 2004, 2007. And then in the central Aleutians in 2007 and 2020, and in the western Aleutians, so west of Chichka Pass in 2020. So these samples are the ones that we've been using over the last few years to resolve the genetic structure of the Pacific halibut stock in IPHC conventional waters. The technique that we've been using is a state-of-the-art genetics technique that is called low-coverage whole genome resequencing. Its name implies that we've been sequencing the genome of every single individual approximately 3 times over. This allows for screening genomic variation at an extremely high resolution. The data that I'll be presenting today, that's the complete data set that has included additional 185 winter collected samples to the data set that I described last year. So now we have a total of 731 individuals sequenced, about 60 individuals per year of collection and geographic location of sampling. These samples have been sequenced in a total of 4 sequencing runs using the Illumina NovaSeq sequencing platform. And the results have yielded 3.7 million autosomal single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SNPs, with an allele frequency higher than 0.05. So these are the genetic variants that we were using for downstream analysis. So the analysis that we've been using to establish whether there's any structure within the Pacific halibut stock have been using several techniques. I'll just summarize it quite briefly here. One is the principal components analysis, or PCA, which is a dimensionality reduction technique. And this is the graph that you see here. Every single point represents one of the 731 individuals, colored by their geographic area. And the spread that you see here is characteristic of the lack of diverse groups. So basically, all geographic areas are circled by 95% confidence ellipses, and those ellipses completely overlap, which means that there's no distinct groups there. Other methods, such as unsupervised clustering, have yielded more or less the same results. So the conclusion is that we cannot identify any discrete genetic groups in our data set. We've also conducted assignment testing to ask the specific question, can we assign individuals back to the population that they were sampled from? And in order to do that, we've calculated assignment accuracy, validating using cross-validation techniques, splitting the sample into a training and a test group. The results are that the assignment accuracy is extremely low. It's under 35%. This is really insufficient accuracy to identify individuals back to the location of origin. As an example, for Pacific salmon species, assignment accuracy is higher than 95%. So for Pacific halibut, it's very low. So the conclusions that we've derived from this comprehensive study is that we have improved the quality of our data set by increasing and balancing sample sizes among the 5 geographic areas that we've studied. That even with a state-of-the-art and high-resolution genomic method, we cannot identify discrete genetic groups among the population. That there is a low probability of accurately assigning individuals back to the location in which they were sampled. And finally, these results support the concept of a single genetic group in IPHC conventional waters. This is consistent with current IPHC assessment practices that is modeled as a single coast-wide stock. Let me move on to the second area where we've done considerable progress over the last few years. One of the areas that was mentioned by Dr. Stewart this morning is the sex ratio of the commercial landings. This was something that we started measuring since 2017 and now has really moved into a monitoring aspect. It's left the research area, and now it's something that we're doing on a yearly basis for the time being. Currently, we're calculating the sex ratios of the 2025 commercial landings, and hopefully we'll have those results later this year. But most of our focus today will be on 2 specific areas, and one is the revised maturity schedules that also Dr. Stewart mentioned to you earlier this morning, right before lunch. And then the upcoming studies that will assess fecundity for the first time. So those 2 aspects, the maturity, revision, and fecundity, are of high importance for stock assessment. They provide direct inputs into stock assessment for the estimation of the stock recruitment relationship. They're useful to estimate annual reproductive output, and they'll be used to revise the time series of historical and future maturity. This is obviously important for scaling female spawning biomass and reference point estimates. So let me explain what we've done regarding the revision of the female maturity schedules. But before we do that, let me explain what we've been using up until 2024 in stock assessment. We've used a previously generated mature schedule, also referred to as ogive. It's the same thing. It's a relationship between years and percent maturity. I'll describe this graph in a second. But the female maturity schedule that was used until the 2024 stock assessment was generated from data collected in 2002 and 2003. That was close to 24 years ago. And only in IPHC regulatory areas 2B and 3A. So it was not a coast-wide estimate. And it was based on the visual classification of female maturity in the field. And this is something that we're continuing to do in our fisheries independent satellite survey. So basically what we do is we visually categorize the maturity status of females based on the visual or macroscopic appearance of the gonad by the field specialist. So we have 4 stages. One is an immature stage, which is stage 1. And then we have 3 mature stages, which are stage 2, which is maturing, stage 3, which is spawning, is females that are actually in the process of spelling eggs. And then stage 4 is post-spawning. That's a spent female. So all those 3 stages, stage 2 to stage 4, are considered mature for stock assessment purposes. So if you look at the graph on the left, that's the relationship between age and the proportion of mature females. That's the maturity schedule. And what you see here is that the schedule that we've been using until 2024 generated an A50 value, which is the age at which 50% of the females are mature, at 11.6 years of age. Okay. So what we did starting in 2017 was to really revise this maturity schedule with more accurate techniques, and that's through the use of histology. So we developed an accurate histologically based female maturity classification method, and this allowed us to classify females not based on external appearance of the gonad, of the ovary in the field, but by histological sectioning of the ovaries and staging of the oocyte stages. So very accurate method that allowed us to classify females into 9 or more different stages. In summary, we can accurately classify females as immature or mature depending on the status of the development of the oocytes. So this is a very accurate method, and has also allowed us to understand much better the reproductive biology of female Pacific halibut. This has allowed us to better understand how eggs are actually being developed, how eggs are maturing, and to learn some important characteristics of the reproductive biology of the species, such as, confirming when peak spawning takes place, confirming that Pacific halibut females are batch spawners. They spawn within one reproductive season. They spawn several times. And that Pacific halibut females have determinate type of fecundity, which is really important information for the fecundity studies that I'll just introduce later on. In the process, we have published a couple of papers describing all these research until recently. So the main objective really of this work has been to use histological criteria to classify female maturity and to revise maturity schedules using this method. Okay, so for that, in 2022, we started collecting maturity samples in our Fisheries Independent Setline Survey. Here you have a map of the sites of collection per year. So in red, you have the collections that we did in 2022. We actually covered all 4 biological regions. We collected more than 1,000 samples that year. In 2023, because of the reduced survey, we were only able to sample biological regions 2 and 3. We collected also over 1,300 ovarian samples for histology. And in 2024, we were able to collect samples from biological regions 2, 3, and 4, as you can see in green. So in total, we have a large collection of samples that we've been using to revise these maturity schedules, over 3,200 samples from 3,200 individual females. So these are the results that were generated by using generalized additive models. So here you have the 4 graphs representing each of the 4 biological regions. So on the top left, you have the results for biological region 2 in gray. In purple on the top right, you have biological region 3. In the bottom left, in pink, you have biological region 4. And in orange, in the bottom right, you have biological region 4B. Note that most of the samples were collected in biological regions 2 and 3. That's where we have the best data. But what this data tells us is that the age of maturity, particularly between biological regions 2 and 3, is slightly different. And this is the 3 years of data combined, 2022 to 2024. And what you can see is those vertical dashed lines indicate the ages at which, from the left to the right, the ages at which 5% of the females are mature, 50% of the females are mature, and then 95% of the females are mature. So if you look at the A50 value in biological region 3 is the lowest. So that means that in biological region 3, females are maturing at a younger age than in any other biological region. So we see spatial differences in maturity with this 3 years of data combined. What's interesting is to look to see what happens from year to year. And this is basically the same data, both with the 3 years indicated by the lines. So in the gray line, it's data from 2022. In the purple lines, data from 2023. in the pink line is data from 2024. And what you could see, and very clearly in biological regions 3, 2, and also in biological region 4, is that there's an actual shift to the left of that curve, which means that progressively females in those 3 biological regions, females have started to mature at a younger age. So not only we have evidence for, at least within these 3 years of data, of spatial differences in maturity schedules, but also temporal differences in this very short period of time. So what about the coast-wide maturity OGIVE, which is really what we've been using in stock assessment so far? This is in black, you see the new histology-derived maturity OGIVE coast-wide compared to the old visual maturity OGIVE that was used up until 2024. And that shows a significant decrease in the A50 value. But we're comparing 2 different things here. One is the histology-derived maturity OGIVE versus a visual-derived. So what we wanted to do is really to compare the difference between the histology and the visual for 2022 to 2024. And we did that because we were collecting, as well as the histological samples, we were collecting also information on the maturity stage and using all those 4 visual criteria. And the blue line that you see here in the middle is the visual maturity schedule compared to the histology in black from the same females, exactly the same females. And we use the difference between the visual and the histology to calculate a calibrating factor that is used by basically comparing the visual and the histological curves to estimate historical temporal patterns of age of maturity using data from the Fisheries Independent Satellite Surveying starting in 2002 up until 2024. Okay, so we basically corrected the visual maturity OGIVEs that were collected historically with the new calibrated method. And this is what we found, that this is 23 years of maturity schedules combined. It's very difficult to see what happens here. But if you were to see the colors, you would actually see that there's temporal shifts from 2002 up until 2015, 2016, all those curves shifted to the right. And from 2015, 2016 to 2024, those curves shifted to the left. So there's been temporal shifts in the maturity schedules looking at this data. Maybe a better indicator of those changes is if we plot the A50 value, so the age at which 50% of the females are mature, by year. And this is the graph. If you look at just the solid line, you can actually see that, from 2002 up until 2015, 2016, there's been a slight increase in the age at which 50% of the females are mature. You go from approximately 10.7 to almost 11.5. But after 2015, 2016, there's been a sharp decrease in the A50 value, which means that from that period of time, from 2015 to 2016, up until around 2022, there's been a significant decrease in the age at maturity. Females have started to mature at a much earlier age. And that seems to have stabilized over the last couple of years. So there's a lot of things here that we're observing, that we're planning and looking at, finding possible relationships with other patterns. But there's definitely a lot of work to be done. So for stock assessment, what's important is basically this graph, is the comparison of the new calibrated coast-wide visual OGIVE, the line in green, that comprises the visual data from 2002 up until 2024 with the previous maturity schedule, the one in red. So the old maturity schedule, we indicated at the beginning of the presentation that it was around 11.6 years of age, but the new maturity OGIVE now brings down to 0.6 years earlier. So now we have a coast-wide calibrated visual maturity schedule that is 11 years of age. So that's a relatively small difference in terms of years, but biologically it's quite important. And as Dr. Stewart indicated, it doesn't change hugely the spawning biomass, but it does explain why the spawning biomass increased a little bit in 2025. One of the things that we have observed too is that we can basically truncate this line at ages under 7 years old. We have not observed among those 3,500 females that we've looked at, any females that are mature at age 7 or under. So this is the new coastwide maturity ogive that is used in the 2025 stock assessment, as Dr. Stewart indicated earlier today. So just to finalize, I'm going to just give an indication of the type of samples that we have to begin our new analysis of fecundity, which will be starting very shortly. So starting in 2023, we collected samples for fecundity in our Fisher's Independent Satellite Survey. So you can see here in this table that we covered in between 2023 and 2024 biological regions 2, 3, and 4. We have more than 1,000 samples from just the FIS. In 2025, we added an additional 878 samples from all biological regions. So now we have a pretty good sample collection just from the FIS. But we've also been doing the last 2 years, starting in 2024, followed up in 2025, and we're continuing this for the last year in 2026 this year, a special collection, which is outside of the survey season. As you know, the survey season spans from June to early September, and we needed samples to calculate fecundity closer to the spawning season. So we've collected a little over 500 samples from later maturing females or females at a later stage in maturity in order to fill in, the spectrum of sizes and maturity status that are going to be needed to properly assess fecundity. So this is where we are embarking in winter of 2026. And as conclusions for this area of reproduction, the histology-based maturity estimates indicate that region 3, biological region 3, shows a higher proportion of mature females at younger ages than other regions. That regional maturity ogives have shifted to the left from 2022 to 2024, indicating that females have started to mature at a younger age. We continued the coastwide monitoring of maturity in 2025. We have samples that we're processing right now, and we're planning to continue collecting samples in 2026, so that we'll have additional years to look at to see if that trend holds up. So a new coastwide maturity ogive using calibrated visual maturity estimates from the 2002 to the 2024 FIS data has been incorporated into the 2025 stock assessment, as Dr. Stewart indicated earlier. And as for fecundity estimates, we have now a good collection of samples to embark on these studies, starting in 2023. And these studies are aimed to answer this question: is female Pacific halibut fecundity proportional to body weight? So basically, are larger females more fecund than medium-sized or smaller-sized females? So I think I'll stop here, and I'll take any questions if there are any. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Planas. Questions? Commissioner Davis.
Thank you, Dr. Planas. I think you have walked us through at other times the sort of broader multi-year research plan, but I'm trying to connect dots here. On the genetics work, I mean, it seems like the big question kind of been answered. Is that fair?
That is correct.
Yeah. And so what's your thought about the role or scope for more work on genetics versus perhaps prioritizing other things as we look ahead?
Yeah, thank you for your question, Commissioner Davis. I think we laid out a pretty substantial groundwork of genomic data to be continued in other areas. That means that now we have the genetic information at such resolution that we can start looking at the genetic basis of changes in size at age, changes in maturity, possibly environmental effects, and possibly even, as it's been reported in the literature, fisheries-induced effects. So I think we're in an excellent position really to move on to try to answer other types of questions as well. With the sequencing of the Pacific halibut genome that we finally published in 2022, and with the genomic data sets that have been generated in this project, I think we have an incredible data set to exploit further.
Dr. Planas, the information you presented about revised reproductive maturity age, can you tell us, in recognizing there's variability here, but the size range in inches for a halibut that's 11.6 years of age?
Yeah, that is, thank you for your question, Commissioner Carlin, because you raise an important point, and because we obviously looked, in addition to age, at other relationships with maturity, and one was length and weight, and they don't show a good relationship with maturity. So it's not, length or weight are not good predictors of maturity. Age is a much better predictor of maturity. So in terms of size, those would be fish that are pretty close to the size limit, that are becoming mature.
So close to 32 inches,
Yes.
but still quite some variability around that, right?
Correct.
And can you characterize that variability in a range, or are you not comfortable doing that?
Not at the top of my head right now.
Okay,
Sorry.
fair enough.
Apologize.
Great, thanks. Commissioner Allison, did you have a question? No. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Let's go ahead and take a break. About 15 minutes. Okay, we'll reconvene in, say, at the top of the hour. Folks, take your seats, please, or take your conversations outside. We're going to reconvene with Dr. Hutchisak with a recap on the regulatory proposals in front of us.
Thank you. This presentation is an introduction to the regulatory proposals for 2026. I will begin by providing an overview of the regulatory process, followed by the introduction of the regulatory proposals under consideration at this meeting, along with their respective proponents. Proponents will also have an opportunity to offer additional commentary to the Commission in support of their submissions and address any questions that may arise. I will also note that all proponents of all proposals are also invited to participate in the proceedings of the Conference Board and Processor Advisory Board sessions to address any questions related to their proposals during those two meetings. A designated time on Thursday's agenda is reserved to revisit regulatory proposals. This will be after the Conference Board and Processor Advisory Board presents their reports to the Commission, allowing further discussion. And only at that point, the Secretariat will ask the decision from the Commission on the regulatory proposals that are in front of us for the 2026. So this is just the introduction for the discussion. In terms of IPHC regulatory process, this year we have 8 regulatory proposals, 2 proposals from the Secretariat, 3 proposals from contracting parties, and 3 proposals from stakeholders. All proposals are available online on the AM102 webpage. As a reminder, all proposals had to be submitted 30 days in advance of the meeting, as required by the IPHC Rules of Procedure. And the regulatory proposals are submitted electronically via IPHC Fishery Regulations Portal, available on the IPHC website. In terms of the process, the the final text of the IPHC fishery regulations will be prepared as the adoption process is progressing. And the document with the revised IPHC fisheries regulations will be then sent to contracting parties for review. And when the final text of the IPHC fishery regulations is reviewed by both contracting parties, then it will be submitted to contracting parties for adoption and implementation. So this is in terms of a process. I will now move to the actual regulatory proposals submitted for 2026 regulations. Proposal A1. This proposal is a framework introducing mortality and fishery limit into IPHC fishery regulations. This proposal includes a table that explicitly outlines TCYs by IPHC regulatory area and a table with applicable fishery limits resulting from those TCY values as determined by the domestic catch sharing arrangement of each contracting party. On Thursday, we will request adoption first of the framework only. The table will be then populated following the TCY decisions by the Commission, made with the input from of the stakeholders through reports from the Conference Board and Processor Advisory Board. Moving to Proposal A2. Proposal A2 is a framework for setting the commercial fishing period. This is where the Commission decides on the opening and closing of the Pacific halibut commercial fishery. As a reminder, with the transition of the 2A management, the 2A non-tribal directed commercial fishery dates will be set by the contracting party within the overall commercial fishing period dates. And the overall commercial fishing period that is set in this proposal, but the specific dates for the 2A are set by the contracting party. So again, on Thursday, first decision will be about the framework, and the second, this will be followed by the decision on the opening and closing dates. Moving to proposals from contracting parties. As mentioned, we have 3 B proposals. Proposal B1 was submitted by NOAA Fisheries and provides a framework for adjusting charter management measures in IPHC regulatory areas 2C and 3A. And this framework is to reflect the mortality limits adopted by the IPHC. Again, this proposal is a framework, and the actual management measures will be defined once the mortality limits are set. We have NOAA Fisheries, specifically Doug Duncan, available if the Commission have any question on the proposal B1. And over to you, Chair.
Any questions? Doesn't look like it.
Easy. Moving to Proposal B2. Proposal B2 was submitted by Fisheries and Oceans Canada and proposes the daily bag limit of up to 3 fish per person in the recreational fishery in IPHC Regulatory Area 2B, beginning on or after 1st of August each year. This provision was temporarily in place through 2025 unless extended by a vote of the Commission, and this proposal is to introduce that measure permanently in the IPHC fishery regulations. And we have DFO Gwen Mason available to provide additional comments and answer any questions on this proposal.
Okay, any questions on this one? Nope.
Okay, thank you. Moving to Proposal B3. Proposal B3 was submitted by NOAA Fisheries and proposes an opening date for the 2026 Area 2A recreational fishery in Washington Puget Sound, the U.S. Convention waters in the Strait on Juan de Fuca, Siberia, and in California. And this proposal was submitted by NOAA Fisheries, and we have Frank Walker available to provide any comments and, on this specific proposal.
Okay. Questions? Striking out.
Okay. Moving to stakeholders' proposals, we have 3 C proposals. And the first one is Proposal C1. This proposal proposes unguided recreational sector Pacific halibut daily bag limit reduction from 2 fish to 1 fish for IPHC regulatory areas in Alaska. And this proposal was submitted by Fishing Vessel Owner Association And I believe the Per Odegaard is not available to provide comments on this proposal, but Commissioner Alverson might be able to follow up on any additional feedback on this proposal.
Mr. Alverson doesn't have any comment at this point.
Okay. Well played.
Great. Moving to proposal C2. Proposal C2 proposes a 3-year pilot program authorizing limited retention of legal-sized Pacific halibut caught incidentally as bait catch outside the Pacific halibut commercial fishing period in year-round hook and line and trap groundfish fisheries in IPHC Regulatory Area 2B. And this proposal was submitted by Robert Harkness, who is available to provide comments on this proposal. I will also note that as a part of some of the earlier comments from the Commission, we also have information paper 4, considerations related to allowing year-round landings of Pacific halibut in Canada, available to the Commission as a part of the documents available to the meeting. And this is very closely related to the proposal that Robert Harkness submitted. And he is available for questions.
Okay, any questions for the proposer? Looks like not.
Proposal C3 aims to ensure that any proposed reduction to the unguided recreational Pacific halibut daily bag limit in Alaska is supported by region-specific biological and socioeconomic information provided by the United States and include analysis developed in cooperation with Alaska Department of Fish and Game prior to adoption by the Commission. This proposal was submitted by Chance Miller from Seward Charter Boat Association and Homer Charter Boat Association, and he's available online to provide any additional feedback if the Commission would request so.
Okay, questions on C3? Commissioner Davis.
Maybe just a question of clarification. I guess I don't understand how this might be regulatory in nature.
Correct. This proposal was somewhat different to the typical proposal, but provided with the specific regulatory language that was submitted, we did accept it as a regulatory proposal. But yes, this proposal could be probably more effectively addressed as a part of the mortality and fishery limits setting and decision-making process. Okay. Thank you. So this wraps up the 8 regulatory proposals that were submitted to the Commission. Moving to stakeholder comments. This is the page prepared as of January 2nd, but as of yesterday, the deadline for accepting the stakeholder comments, the Commission received 935 stakeholder comments. I will note that this is a record as far as I know. The majority of the proposals, majority of the stakeholder comments, they were expressions of opposition to proposal C1, in contrast to a couple of in support of that proposal. There were also few, or the second most common topic addressed in those stakeholder comments were comments related to charter management measures in regulatory areas 2C and 3A. And there were also a few comments on the precautionary approach to Pacific halibut management. So these were the most common topics raised in those stakeholder comments. As a note, all submitted comments are available using the link provided here. And these submissions were, again, accepted up until the day before the IPHC session and are available to both the public and the Commission to inform its decision making. Thank you.
Okay, any additional questions for Dr. Hutchsek on regulatory proposals? I did have one. I had heard from stakeholders about a comment submitted that was not treated as a regulatory proposal. This was from Buck Lakaitis about a conservation or recovery plan, I forget how he described it, for the Bering Sea. And there was a similar proposal last year that we did treat as a regulatory proposal. Is there anything you can say to explain how we classified that as a comment rather than a regulatory proposal?
Yes, last year we have this kind of an unconventional proposal that was included in the record as a regulatory proposal section, but it was actually written, it was not really a proposal. This year we took a little bit more conservative stand in terms of what the regulatory proposal actually has to include. And this includes something that is really actionable and enforceable, and that includes a regulatory language that is available for the enforcement in the and can be introduced into the regulations in some way that it can be properly enforced. So yeah, just trying to be a little bit more conservative in terms of how we treat regulatory proposals and make sure that any regulatory proposals that is submitted fulfills the and includes the necessary elements that it and this includes also regulatory language that would be required in order to introduce it.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, I think that is it for this agenda item, and that brings us to public comment. Dr. Wilson.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. And so we have 10 people currently signed up for public comment. And we're just going to bring up the PowerPoint so we can just walk through. If you see your name up on screen after each comment, if you could just come up, we have microphone and table to the left and right, and then address the commission. So the first is Buck Lakaitis in relation to agenda item 6.1. So over to you, Buck.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and commissioners. My name is Buck Lakaitis. I'm representing Magic Fish Company. It's 3 of my boats, approximately 30 crewmen. So I have if I might, I have a question for Dr. Hicks on his MSc presentation, and then a comment after that, if that's acceptable. So Dr. Hicks, I wanted to hear your thoughts on the depleted and overfishing designations and the idea of doing that by biological region or geographically. So what I'm thinking is, isn't it important biologically to think about those areas, that the areas maintain spawning biomass and spawning areas? And so, like, for me, the best analogy I could come up with is if you had, if we were salmon managers here, and the Fraser River just turned up a 0, no escapement. But the same year, Bristol Bay's got 60 million sockeyes. They're 2,000 miles apart. Wouldn't it make sense to call the Fraser River depleted, overfished, something like that, to protect that area? And I'm just thinking, as applied to halibut, isn't that, has the MSC considered that that's an important, or how do you see that? I guess that's my question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Lakaitis, for the question. It's a really good question. Halibut, Pacific halibut are slightly different than salmon. And one of the big differences with Pacific halibut is that they tend to migrate long distances and are not, don't have site fidelity or fidelity to one particular population, like a Fraser River or Bristol Bay. And Dr. Planas showed earlier today that that we were unable to identify stock structure across the coastwide. So there's that complication, and that this is really one population that is intermixing. But given that, I think there's important regional considerations that we should make, and that's why we've defined these regions, which we've also called bioregions. For that purpose is that there are slight differences between these 4 regions that we've identified across our convention area. And regarding the MSC, to make the answer a little bit short, but ensure you that we are thinking about this, is we've identified coastwide objectives within the MSC process with the MSAB and the SRB. But During that process, we've also identified some regional objectives, and we're hopefully going to work on those in the future. And one of those regional objectives is to maintain biodiversity across, or spawning diversity across all 4 regions. And what that really means is we want to have an objective of maintaining spawning biomass in all regions, because we are unsure how important one region is to the successful reproduction. So hopefully that answers your question.
That's great. And if I might just follow up with a comment. So, well, first of all, I'm really thankful that we have the staff we do. They're great communicators and very talented people. So and a friend in the audience said that I'm getting old and I start weaving a little bit. So I wrote some things down because I guess it's a good term, weaving, and hard to understand. So 2 years ago in Anchorage at the 100th annual meeting, I asked you all to reduce the TCY 25% and keep it down for 5 years. People literally laughed. Last year in Vancouver, I called a May Day about the state of the resource in Area 4 of the Bering Sea to see if anyone was listening. I got a response, but we're still waiting for the chopper. And once you realize no one's coming to help, you have to change strategies to stay alive and save your crew. For this meeting, I wrote a rebuilding plan for the Bering Sea as a regulatory proposal. The director, Dr. Wilson, included it as a comment, not as a proposal, so probably none of you have seen it. Thank you, Dr. Wilson, for helping me make my point that you run an organization that does not welcome differing views. Obviously, I come to these meetings for the rush of dopamine and oxytocin and other good feelings. I don't have any answers, but I do have informed questions that I think warrant attention. If there's a pattern like 32, 16, 8, 4, do I need to wait to 2 to raise my hand and point it out? As a longtime commercial halibut fisherman operating in the Bering Sea, I wrote this proposal out of deep concern for the future of our fishery. I've spent decades on these waters, and what I'm seeing firsthand is alarming. Fewer and smaller fish, unprecedented difficulty in locating halibut, and catches falling far short of our Area 4 allocations. We cannot catch fish that are not there. History shows that fishery models have been wildly wrong before. Look no further than the Atlantic cod collapse in the 1990s, where optimistic assessments ignored fishermen's warnings and led to near commercial extinction and economic devastation in Newfoundland and the Gulf of Maine. Major revisions to IPHC models happened in the early 2000s, overestimating the biomass of halibut. And I believe we're on the cusp of needing similar humility and updates now. The precautionary principle demands we act conservatively when uncertainty is high, especially with sparse surveys and the real-world indicators screaming for caution. Delaying risks irreversible harm to the stock and our livelihoods. So the IPHC has one job. It's one species. It's halibut. NIMS and DFO have many other species to manage. So please, I want to protect my fishery. That's the economic argument. And I want to protect the resource. That's the sustainability argument. I want my grandkids to be able to catch fish in the Bering Sea. It means a lot to me. And then finally, please see my comment letter. It's one of the 500, probably hard to find, about the inadequacies of the surveys in Area 4. And it's essential that you fund the Area 4 surveys because we have in my view, a declining resource with, not enough surveys. And that concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Commissioner DeGreef.
Hi, Buck. Sorry. Yeah, rest assured, we found your stakeholders' comment, or not the comment, but the stakeholder
There's a comment.
Yeah, not the little comment. My question is just this year, the commercial 4C and 4D CPUE in region 4 and 4D looks like it's up considerably. Was that your experience as well, or it doesn't sound like it was?
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner, for the question. We had a reporter on our boat this summer, and the nature of the story was kind of the end of halibut. And then my skipper went out and pulled the best trip in a long time. I mean, it was like completely counter to the narrative of the story. So no doubt about it. But I would answer some of that is it's maybe a fishery response. It's basically because we've had multiple years where we've caught less than half of the allocation in Area 4. Plus we took a large cut last year of 20 or 22%. And maybe, I don't know, maybe we're starting to see a response in at least fisheries performance. But my point on the economics, I'm more worried about the conservation. I'm worried that we're not getting enough fish to the spawning grounds to sustain the stock, basically. We're only about 19% of the removals in the Bering Sea. There's other rationalized fleet in the Bering Sea that are on the grounds, literally. They're rationalized. They're, it's not 12 months a year, but it's at the times when you would expect those fish to spawn. And so you're only managing a small part of the resource, but I think we might have seen a little fisheries response because of some of the cuts we saw or took last year. And because we're leaving, I mean, you're only catching half the allocation. So you would expect there to be better fishing. And I'll conclude, but I am not able to go put on a trip in any area in Area 4 anymore where I can take a very competitive boat with a very good crew and a super experienced captain and go out and economically find fish, return to port, and be economical. That's my operation. I have 3 different boats. They all have slightly different efficiencies or costs, and it's become, I mean, it's not just me. There'll be people that come up behind me and say they had better experience, and that's fine, but you can't manage for one group of people. You have to manage for the entire region, and the numbers don't lie. 2 years in a row, less than 50% of Area 4 has been caught by the commercial fleet, and that's the averages. So that's what I would say. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the response.
Commissioner Yamada.
Hi, Bud. In all your years of experience, do you feel that fish have site fidelity, that they come back to the same spot every year, and that fishermen depend on finding those spots, and that maybe fish have moved? And how much exploring do fishermen do?
Thank you for the question, Commissioner. I think fishermen have gotten a pretty good handle on where the most productive places are, whether they're from year over year, those same fish are finding those same places, same individual fish are finding the same places. I'm not sure about that. Definitely the most productive areas are known to fishermen. And sometimes, strategy for years has been not to go to the most productive areas because they tend to attract the most fishermen. And so it might be counterproductive to have a fishing strategy to go to that area. And maybe it's better to fish lower CPUE areas. So the thing that really, I mean, I'm not a complainer by nature. We're usually very positive. Give us a task, we'll go do it. The thing that changed in my mind in the Bering Sea is on the edge, there used to be a lot of fish and we couldn't fish. We couldn't go because of the whale situation. But I knew those fish were there and I thought, well, we can't get them left to fish a low CPUE area, but I know the fish are there and they're going to spawn. Well, that changed. And now I'm not convinced that those fish are being protected by the whales over them. And when we go to those areas now that used to be very good, it was the deep gullies on the edge, and it happens to be where the fish will eventually spawn. When those fish, from our experience, and we spent a lot of time up there, when those fish were either gone or in very small, where it used to be like really good sets, like 5,000 pounds, and then it was down to 500 pounds. That's when I got concerned. And to answer your question, those are the most productive areas, and they're also where a lot of the other NIMS fleets love to fish. And it's a trawler, not a longliner. So that is a doubly concerning to me. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
I think you're safe, Buck. Thanks. Appreciate your comments. And I did read your comments, by the way.
Thanks, Chair. The next is DD Creed in relation to proposal B1. DD, please.
Commissioners, okay. Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Deirdre DD Creed. I operate a guided charter fishing business in Southeast Alaska, and I represent the Sitka Charter Fleet Association, a group that has brought together more than 100 charter operators in Sitka over the past year. It's the largest gathering of charter operators our community has ever seen. Our operators care deeply about this fishery, responsible management, and long-term future of halibut in our region. I'm speaking regarding charter management measures in IPHC regulatory areas 2C and 3A to share both my personal experience and the collective perspective of Sitka Charter Fleet. I'd like to give an overview of what we are experiencing on the fishing grounds in the summer and what we experience when booking anglers, with an emphasis on the growing reliance of gaff fish due to regulation decisions. As operators, we target halibut every day of the week that it is open, and more increasingly target gaff halibut, including on days when halibut is closed. As a guide, we have seen very productive fishing in Sitka. If the weather is manageable, most operators tend to catch a boat limit daily, as this can be referenced by the 80.8% catch rate in Sitka from 2025, published by ADF&G in December of 2025. This catch rate isn't due to not being selective. Although we are allowed any size under 37 inches, a majority of guides target halibut within 5 inches of that lower limit. We target multiple species in a day, but we have seen that anglers visiting Alaska tend to put high priority on halibut. As far as what that looks like on the grounds, it is common practice to not anchor within a quarter mile of other operators to not mess up their halibut soak, as it takes approximately 45 minutes for a halibut to travel at a casual pace at a quarter mile. And so it takes about an hour to 2 hours to catch a boat limit of halibut between the size of 32 to 37 inches. To me, this signifies very strong fishing. If fishing abundance were scarce, we'd see guides on top of each other fighting for a fish among themselves, other than following the gentleman's agreement to not anchor within a quarter mile. Instead, we're so spoiled that we claim that fishing is bad when we're closer to that 2 hour time rather than that 1 hour time. You would assume that reducing our size would reduce our catch rate, but it actually increases our rate because we'd be forced to fish in areas where halibut is known to be very strong, between 28 and 32 inches. These areas are even more abundant than the areas where we target 32 to 37 inches. For reference, the fishing in these areas with smaller halibut is so quick that the quarter mile rule is that's unspoken in other areas isn't recognized in these areas with smaller fish. Clients are impressed by the speed, but not as much by the quality when it hits the table. At the end of the day, clients rebook in the fall and spring based on quality of meat that they're eating throughout the winter and how quickly they reach their limit, not by how quickly they reach their limit. And catching these fish is noticeably less satisfying for our clients and often ignites an interest in purchasing gaff to make up for smaller fish. So by reducing our size limit, we are effectively reducing the value of meat that a person can take home for food. These fillets are much thinner and not as quality for table fare. This would unintentionally take away from the quality of access, where a commercial fish cannot be any smaller than 32 inches. In order to get a grade fish, a client either has to pay for a gaff tag or buy their halibut from a grocery store or processor. So we are creating a world where you essentially get the scraps if you are fishing for yourself on a charter. The final point I'd like to explain is how tighter charter regulations are changing business decisions in ways that may have not been fully visible in the data. Many operators are now considering packages being sold with gaff access bundled into the trip instead of being sold as a true add-on. This shift is not driven by preference, it's driven by necessity. As baseline charter opportunity shrinks, operators are choosing between discounting trips or preserving the client experience through gaff. And more often than not, gaff becomes the only working viable option. This forces operators to take on real financial risk, as any gaff left unsold at the end of the season is a direct loss, and it creates pressure to market and use gaff earlier and more consistently. Online marketing increasingly highlights gaff access, and operators who do not offer it are likely losing bookings to those who do. Expectations across the fleet have shifted, and increased demand on gaff tags will increase the price of those tags. We are also increasingly close to tapping out the allowable total catch of gaff as a fleet. So where currently many operators buy gaff throughout the season, it seems that it's more likely that people will buy larger chunks earlier in the season, and it will become either unavailable or more expensive later in the season. This increases the market pressure on gaff fish, creating a landscape where a guide must offer it to survive, shifting it from a supplemental tool to a foundational tool. And I don't believe that was the intention of the program. This shift is now visible in public data. According to NOAA published summaries of IFQ to gaff transfers and gaff landings, the number of gaff fish harvested coastwide in 2C increased from roughly 1,800 fish in 2022 to 6,500 fish in our most recent season. This increase is approximately 260%, roughly 3.6 times as many fish. Total gaff poundage increased as well, but at a slower rate, showing that gaff fish are being harvested. More gaff fish are being harvested, not just simply larger ones. And I should note that this increase is not driven by targeting bigger gaff fish. The table shows that average gaff halibut size has remained relatively stable since its inception in 2014, generally between 53 and 55 inches in 2C. And we actually saw the smallest size at 53 inches this year. This indicates that gaff is being used more often. And just for context, a 53-inch gaff halibut is approximately 70 pounds and 52 pounds dressed. On the water, this matches what operators are experiencing. Gaff is increasingly relied on as baseline access, especially in closure days, rather than as an occasional supplement. If the maximum charter size is reduced to 32 inches, many guides will respond in predictable ways. They'll either retain smaller 28 to 32-inch halibut quickly and rely even more on gaff, and neither outcomes reflect how guides actually want to operate. Catching small fish provides poor table fare and is not satisfying for clients or guides, but has become our only option under the tighter rules. Over time, this trend raises fairness concerns where the charter fleet, for newer operators who are looking at new or buying expensive charter permits, adding the additional cost of gaff on top of that makes it increasingly harder for younger people to invest into the fishery. So if the commission continues down this path, the charter halibut fishery in Southeast Alaska will increasingly depend on gaff as a foundation rather than a supplement. And that would be a major shift in how this fishery operates, driven by economic pressure rather than biological need. I worry that reducing our size limits may not actually reduce removals proportionately, because it speeds up harvest of smaller fish and increases gaff reliance. When baseline charter opportunity shrinks, gaff stops being a safety valve and starts becoming the business model. And I raise this point not to oppose gaff, but to flag it as an early warning. the current management path may not reduce the total removals in a meaningful way. So based on the commission's science and our collective experience, I respectfully ask the commissioners to either maintain the current framework that allows retention of 37-inch halibut with no more than one closure day per week, which could require up to a 10% increase to show stability. The guided sport fishery represents a small share of the total halibut removals, but provides significant value to Southeast Alaska communities. And I'd also like to note that I wrote a letter that references portions of fish relative to the length of the fish. The letter is number 877, and it includes a chart that breaks down the portions and table for equality based off of the inches of the fish. So thank you for your time, your consideration, and the work that you do for this shared resource. I appreciate the opportunity to contribute both my experience and the collective experience of the Sitka Charter Fleet. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments, Ms. Creed. Any questions? Commissioner Yamato.
Yeah, Ms. Creed, regarding the gaff, do most operators buy more than one gaff per guest, or is it common practice to buy multiple? If somebody's fishing for a week, do they buy multiple gaffs for a guest?
Typically, after a gaff fish is retained, the pressure to catch more halibut reduces. Often, clients will actually opt out of fishing for halibut after that because they've taken, depending on the size of the gaff they've recognized that they've gotten quite a bit of halibut to take home with them. That's not across the board, but that has been, I've seen that fairly often.
Is it easy to find gaff fish?
I would, it was very easy this year. We've only been, the group that I fish with has only been targeting gaff fish for 2 years, so I can't speak to that more than my last 2 years of experience. But a gaff fish typically will be caught under, like if you soak for 3 hours, you will retain a gaff fish. Like the maximum we spend is 3 hours. But yeah, the fishing has been good.
Also, have you thought about what impact the halibut stamp will have on your guests and their experience with their halibut?
We have done a lot of education with our clients about the halibut stamp coming up, and they generally are in favor of that. Our operation and many operations are taking on that cost themselves and aren't charging that back to client, or we're taking the cost as the guides.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next is also on proposal B1 is Jimmy Akana. Jimmy, if you could come forward, please.
Thank you, Council. Thank you for your time and for what you do. I represent the Seward Small Charter Boat Association, about 35 boats right now. We're just asking, we're very simple, just to keep a status quo from what we did last year to this following season. The days of the week closure that we've been able to handle, we've been able to keep our boats going. If we take any more hits, it'll be, the hardest thing for us is when it varies year to year. When we have consistency, we can make something happen. So this year, we're just proposing just to have a status quo. I know there was small percentages up, but we'd rather just keep it at the same. The RQE, we're going to pass, some boats are going to pass that off to clients. Some boats are going to eat that price. We just want to see how that's going to work out in the next 3 years. So that's about all I have from the association.
Thank you, Mr. Akana. Commissioner Albertson.
So what was your last name again?
Akana.
Mr. O'Connor, I've been trying to prove just how big this 16 and 17 year age classes that we supposedly have out there. And I've talked to a number of the commercial guys that said they see them in spots, but not everywhere. I'm just wondering what you've seen with your clients. Have you seen this New Year class, maybe a 30-inch, 31-inch fish coming through the system?
I would say that this last season, for sure, fishing out of Seward was very good this last season. I wouldn't say that we saw lots of large fish, but we had lots of quality fish. Putting a limit of the hardest fish for me to find was something under 27 inches. That was the one that I came home light on a lot, trying to find the small one. The larger, I would say that probably that 30 to 36 inch was probably my common catch out of Seward.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. The next is on proposal C1. Natalie Anderson, please.
Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Natalie Anderson, and I'm a second-generation charter captain with Screamin' Rails Guide Service and Lodge on Prince of Wales Island. I'm 18 years old and the youngest captain in our fleet, working towards buying our family business so I can build a lifelong career in this industry. I'm here today because the path you choose for halibut management will decide whether that future exists, not only for me, but for an entire generation of young guides. This year alone, reductions in regulations had severe impact on our business. We are already seeing a significant drop in bookings for the 2026 season. Year after year, continued cuts across the fisheries send a clear potential to clients that Alaska is becoming the place where you can keep less and pay more to do it. All summer long, I heard the same thing from clients visiting from the Pacific Northwest. They told me they could take a day trip off the Washington coast and legally retain more halibut than they could on a guided trip in Alaska. That comparison matters. It directly affects whether people choose to travel north or stay home. According to the Commission's own assessments, all biological targets are being met. Spawning biomass increased by 7% this year, and the 3-year forecast shows the spawning biomass is continuing to grow. A coast-wide catch limit of 32.7 million pounds is a 10% increase. It's a conservative approach. It provides relief to the guided sport sector and is still projected to allow continued growth in spawning biomass. Recent cuts to our catch limits are short-term measures driven largely by fleet economics, not by biological necessary. Under your Commission's own definitions, objectives, and science, we are not in conservation mode. Management decisions should not be driven solely by the economics of the commercial fleet. I strongly urge the Commission not to implement additional closed halibut days for guided charters. Further restrictions are simply not something our businesses can afford. I care deeply about the long-term sustainability of our fisheries. Conservation matters to me and it always will, but sustainability also means sustaining people, communities, and opportunities. I want a future in this industry. I want to support my community. I want to continue the legacy that my family has built. I ask you to reflect on the cuts your generation has witnessed in this industry and to consider what my generation will face if regulations continue to be reduced. Will young captains like myself still have the opportunity to guide in the future? I ask you to let the science guide your decisions and to recognize that we are not in conservation mode and to understand that the guided fleet cannot withstand further restrictions. Thank you for your time and thank you for listening.
Thanks for your comments, Ms. Anderson. Any questions? Don't see any. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Forrest Braden. The topic is the 3-year surplus. Forrest.
Cool. Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I put 3-year surplus down. I didn't know exactly what to put. I've got a couple of questions for the Secretariat, but first I'd like to speak to a few things that I heard and maybe put a little bit more clarification. For the record, I forgot Forrest Braden, Southeast Alaska Guides Organization, Executive Director. Just to speak a little bit to the pressures on Area 2C charter fleet and the gap that was brought up on a previous testifier. I think this commission is well aware that the GAF program was an outlet to exceed the regular charter limit, but there's caps on it. If you didn't know, the RQE has a 10% cap and it phases GAF out. And we're currently pretty close to that. And this is the first year that it's implemented. And so there's a chance that if our regulations go down, or even if they don't, there's going to be a scramble for GAF and people won't be even able to find it. The hottest commodity or hottest size quota block on the market right now is not the 2,000 or 3,000 pound block like it used to be. It's 1,500 pounds because that's what you can fully lease out to the charter fleet. So folks are buying those up and sitting at home while they get caught by the charter fleet, which is not illegal or bad. It's just it's tough to be in the position where we can't rely on our own resource, our own allocations, and a lot of people are unsettled about it. I will speak to the fact that if I've heard some support for 5% cuts in Region 2C, which all of our charter fleet is in Region 2C. And right now we're asking as an organization to hold our limits at 37 inches with all of our Thursdays closed. If we took a 5% cut, that equates to, it brings us down to a 33-inch fish with almost all Thursdays closed, which actually represents about a 30% cut in size of fish. It's a 17-pound net weight fish down to a 12-pound net weight fish. And it's just not realistic to fish at that bandwidth anymore. Those fish are almost, our average is pretty low anyway, and it would bring our, it's just, they're not worth keeping. I'm not sure why 3A holds on to that second fish. That's their prerogative. But they, as was formally spoken to, they're not great table fare. They're really super thin fillets. They don't package well and they don't add up to much. And it's just not an interesting, attractive product anymore. So my first question is on the decision table, which would be Dr. Stewart, if he's okay with that. Slide 10. Oh, thanks. And I guess you can freelance this, but I don't know if that can come up so folks can see what we're talking about here. If not, that's okay. Oh, great. So just noticing every year that I stare at this, I notice more and more. And the conservation blocks here are the first two blocks, the stock trend and spawning biomass and stock status. And I was noticing, and I want to know if this is the correct interpretation, that most of the values under the stock status for reaching, for the harvest control rules 30 and then B20 at a closure, they're all very similar. And what, so why would, as we go from left to right or right to left, why are those values all similar?
Yeah, so I mentioned this briefly earlier, but maybe in the context, not in exactly the same context. The issue there is that there is a probability that we are already below some of those stock status reference points. So in particular, B30, there's a chance that we're below that reference point now. And that if we are below that point now, across this range, all of these harvests will lead us to about the same probability of being below that at the end of the time period. So essentially, if we're below it now, we're not going to recover under these harvest rates over that same time period.
Okay, and would it be safe to assume, I'm sorry.
So I was just going to say, but conversely, the probability is not going up of being below those reference points appreciably either over that same.
Okay, so there's almost an identical probability there that we're hitting, that we're saying above the harvest control rule. Okay, and then in the stock trend portion, I don't think there's a big appetite for a lot of stakeholders here in the room to go to +10, although we do think that it's anything within a +10 to -10 in terms of cuts or increases. For one, and tell me if we're thinking wrong here, for one, it probably, or let's call it 5+ to 5-, that those level of cuts or increases have an influence or don't have an influence on a good recruitment for 2026, for instance.
Yes, so I think there's two things to think about in terms of these projections. The first one is, how does a management action in the next several years affect the probability of having another good recruitment coming? And over this range we're looking at, there's essentially no difference in the chance of getting a big recruitment in the next couple of years, depending on this range that we're looking at across the middle of the table. There's a very weak, if any, relationship between spawning biomass and subsequent recruitment. So our chances of having another good year class coming along are not going to be appreciably affected by catch levels across this range that we're looking at here. The other consideration there is what happens to the biomass that's already in the water. And so most of the response that you're seeing in this table is the change in probability of the stock going up or down based on the growth and mortality of the fish that are already sitting in the water. So we're really talking about managing those, primarily those two younger year classes over the next 3 years.
Okay, and then on slide 10, which is the closer look at the recruitment, not the going back into the 1930s, but that short recruitment graph that you've got, is it on the same? No, it's on the assessment, I think.
That would be in presentation 10 instead of 12.
Okay, I'll speak to it. I don't know if it's quick enough to pull it up, but so just an observation and make sure that we're seeing this straight, and then a question, and I'll finish. Is it slide 10? Yeah. Are we in the right presentation?
We are.
Okay.
They got us covered. Keep going.
Okay, great. So just looking at this slide 10.
That's probably about 27 or 28.
Oh, it's 30. Sorry.
Yeah.
Time for glasses. Again, I think I've said that here like 3 years ago. Anyway, for the sake of time, what I was noticing is that the highest spawning biomass that we had kind of started in the mid 90s and peaked around 2000. And even though these look high relative to what we're looking at, they're relatively low for compared to the 80s, early 90s recruitments, and that's when we had the most fish in the water. So I guess that underscores that idea that it's completely independent. But what I did hear you say in one of the times I've talked to you, your presentation, is we were on, I think you said this time several years ago, we were talking about the 2012 year class carrying us, and it's slightly lower than the 2016 as far as we know now, or maybe about equal. It looks like equal, and 2017 maybe just slightly below that. So the question out of this is, if the 2012 carried us for a while, is there more hope that the 16 and 17 to back might have a little bit better power to carry the fleet, or is that a mischaracterization of that?
Thanks for the question. It's not exactly a one-to-one, because when the 2012s came in, we were actually still fishing on the 2005s as well. So those were carrying us a bit, and that year class persisted a little bit deeper into the age structure than the 2012s did. And I would caveat that the 2016 and 17 year classes is really only the second time we've seen them. So they're still a bit uncertain. Okay. I wouldn't expect them to come in wildly higher or wildly lower than we're seeing now, but they could be adjusted in upcoming assessments. So I guess it's hard to say if there really are 2 year classes of similar magnitude. They should provide more yield in the next several years than we got from the single 2012 year class.
Okay, I appreciate it. And I'll just wrap up. That's all the questions I have. I'll just wrap up with a comment that it seems like we're meeting all the biological targets. I know there's some concern about being at an extra low spawning biomass, and the work on a depletion level is preliminary. The preliminary runs show that it would take about half as much biomass, something in the 90 million pound. If you're over that the stock shows recover. It's able to recover. However, I know that the SRB went back and asked for more, suggested more runs on that. That said, so what we're understanding is that we've got really only a short-term view, that we don't know what's happening after 2018. We have really no idea what's in the water. So that's good and bad, because the 2016, 17 and the end of 2012 will carry us. for a while, assuming that there's zero recruitment after that. Our comment would be that these small tactical cuts aren't really preserving a lot. If you take a 5% cut and you leave 1.5 million pounds in the water total coast-wide, or take 5 out of 2C and hold everybody else steady, if you're leaving that extra 500,000 pounds in the water for the amount of economic harm that it causes the fleet, what are the gains that you get? If that 500 pounds sits in the water for another year or two and there's nothing coming down the pipeline, we're in trouble one way or another. But we're in trouble now. And so we're asking the commission to take year by year steps. These numbers will be revised, including the 3-year surplus next year. We'll have a better idea of the 2016 and 17 year class. We might have a preliminary idea of 18. And so we're asking the commission, for the sake of, and not managing, I know it states in the harvest strategy policy that maybe we need to add sport fishery in there, but it's for the economics of the directed commercial fishery. But we're going to have to balance the economic needs of both fleets, and we recognize that there are economic consequences right now for the commercial fleet. But we're asking you, instead of considering cuts, to honor the last 2 cuts that you took. Let's hold for a year, maybe 2, and see what those cuts are able to do with incoming year classes. And again, the risk, if you look at the decision table and the risk table, the risk is relatively low, like very low, that we're going to make any huge mistakes. Hopefully someone else will speak to the 2023 threshold of not going below it. But the projections that we've been shown show that we can stay above that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Braden. Any questions? Don't see any. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. The next is by David Crichton on the TCY adjustments. David.
Yes, we're moving on to good evening, commissioners. My name is David Creighton. I'm here to represent the Prince of Wales Charter Association. Several of whom I represent are hoping their businesses will be here for 2nd and 3rd generations. Our current trajectory leads us to a bit of concern, I'm afraid. Halibut specifically are an extremely high value species to lower 48 state anglers. If you've ever reeled in a halibut, you might agree with the anglers I work with. It's not particularly fun. They're not a wild and crazy fish to fight. The halibut's prestige, it's specific to its meat. The prize and value is, with a mature fish, it doesn't fit well with a catch and release model. Nowhere on the planet can I find an outdoor adventure where they market the taking of a baby anything. This is the potential opportunity left for non-resident anglers not familiar with safe navigation and boat operation. Let's go catch a baby halibut, said nobody ever. Can you imagine an outfitter marketing, come hunt baby deer with us? Maybe an outfitter should try that, actually. Baby deer is probably high quality and tender and that sort of thing. Perhaps a niche market there. However, small halibut are not that way. They're lower quality, thin, too delicate, and described as mushy, versus the meaty texture you would typically use to describe halibut. The loss of marketability is our issue. We market opportunities. In 2025, most operators I've spoken with experienced a loss of repeat clients due to unfavorable regulations. I personally lost a whole bunch in 2025 and about double that for 2026 so far. And again, these are repeat clients. Keep in mind, this is prior to regulation announcements. Customers state they will wait to see what happens with regulations, so they don't book. I'm justifiably fearful of what may come here with these announcements. A direct quote from one of my guests. Obviously, Alaska doesn't want to share its fish with us anymore. It doesn't want us as customers. Like many other operators, I supplement with gaff to preserve that desirable opportunity for my guests to take a mature fish. We're rapidly running up against the limit of that costly and finite segment of resource, as discussed by the previous commenters. In the past, we as a fleet, we've expressed our concern with these reductions in regulation. We've stated it impacts us hugely and we might wither and die. And of course, you know, we rally, we market harder, and we continue to survive. But at that time, we didn't really know what our customers would truly tolerate. We've come to the point where now we know what they won't tolerate, and that's obviously days where they can't fish or very small fish. Furthermore, we're coming up to a point where there won't be enough gaff or money to afford to buy the gaff to go around. The halibut opportunity and value extended into our communities is huge. Staple businesses, you know, if I've spoken to several of them in the Craig community specifically, that they generate 50 to 60% of their annual revenue from the charter fleet. You know, it's not necessarily about profitability, but more about their business viability. And these staple businesses, if they depart, it's a mass burden on the people that live there. And it ends up increasing, you know, their already rapidly rising costs of living in this kind of somewhat remote way of life that we prefer. I've examined some of the data presented to you and to us, educated in biology myself, yet certainly not an expert. What I see are probabilities. I'd go to Vegas on them. That spawning biomass is going to continue to rise even with slight increases in harvest. I also see these micro adjustments, either up 10% or down 10%, show very little potential for any noteworthy impact on stock growth. Inversely, these adjustments are going to have huge economic impacts on charter fleet and the communities we support. Your decisions, whether up or down, are going to determine whether they're a positive impact or a negative. Given regulations, economic reports, and other lodge operators, we can expect angler effort to likely be down again in 2025. I urge commissioners not to take an ultra-conservative approach to adjustments this year and not an equally conservative approach to economics. I think it's worth considering. Please figure out a way to keep the charter fleet in Area 2C at a 37-inch fish and a 1 day of the week closure. I think if you look hard, you'll see those slight increases to the fleet is still very conservative and aligns with the recently readopted harvest strategy policy. There's no scientific reason or IPHC policy reason that can't let this ride for another year or two, according to your policy. We're not quite at a crisis level yet. I thank you for your time.
Thanks, Mr. Creighton. Commissioner Albertson.
Mr. Creighton, when you're operating your charter operations, do you operate with a guided master on the boat and operate with a federal halibut permit?
Yes, sir. We have one U.S. Coast Guard licensed captain and a charter halibut permit.
So increasingly, there are people using a bareboat charter operation, and you have the cruise ships operating in a fashion where having a similar operation, and so they can get the 2 fish bag limit. And as that increases, that is treated like it comes off the top of the 2C quota, which reduces the charter boat quota that you operate under and the commercial quota that Linda Binkin operates under. Do you have any comment about that growth and that where that's going?
You know, I would state that, you know, the cruise industry doesn't likely add to the bareboat charter that you're referring to. I think that it's the discrepancy between the sport charter, the guided segment regulation set, and the unguided regulation set that it's creating the shift headed that direction. I believe that the majority of people that come to Southeast Alaska, they would rather be cared for, and in this case, being cared for is at the you know, the peril is that they don't get to retain fish. So they're forced to go that direction instead.
Yeah, I find your operation to be more professional and safe operation for customers. So thank you for your comments.
Thank you for the question.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. The next is Linda Bankin on multiple topics. Linda.
Thank you, Commissioners. Linda Benkin with Alaska Longline Fishermen's Association. I know it's late. I'll try to be brief. I did want to comment on the situation in 2C. I think the presentation showed that there had been an underestimate of unguided sport harvest without really zeroing in on where, but of 120%. And as some of you know, that over harvest or underestimate of what the harvest would be in unguided sport was in 2C. So we saw close to a 40% year over year, so since last year, increase in what that unguided sector took. These are not residents who suddenly caught a whole lot more halibut. This is an evolving bareboat model or outfitter model that been seeing 2C. As you know, I've come and spoken about this, as have others, probably for 4 years now, asking that the council, the commission, the Board of Fish, sort of everybody figure out a way to get their arms around this sector that's not currently limited, because we anticipated seeing an increase. I'm not sure this increase is really real or a trend, may be more of a blip that comes down a little bit in the next couple years. But nevertheless, we've been worried about that increase. And that's why you see those proposals in there for a 1 fish bag limit. While this may not be the right body to take this up at this point, there's certainly a lot of pushback to you doing that, given those 900 and some comments. I would note that one of the letters you received from our commissioner called for the council to take this issue up, the North Pacific Council. That individual has a seat on the North Pacific Council. It may be a helpful recommendation from this body to the commissioner and to the North Pacific Council that you think the council should take this up, that you are seeing this increase in this harvest in a declining stock, where others are being asked to conserve, where those impacts are clearly having great economic impact on people. Having one sector that just increased 40% seems incongruous and like it needs some management attention. We will also ask for that action from the council, but I think hearing from this body that if that body doesn't think this body should take it up, well, then you would like to see them take some action. I did want to also note that because of this increase in unguided sport, and also because under the catch sharing plan at these low levels of abundance, that there is a larger percentage of the TCUI that goes to the charter sector. Cuts in 2C are particularly disproportionate in their impact to the commercial sector. So for example, if you reduce the TCUI in 2C by 5%, we see over a 10% drop in the catch limit for the commercial fishery. If you were to drop it by 10%, it's close to a 22% cut in 2C for the commercial fishery. Just wanted to make sure you were aware of that. We do certainly support some conservation in the area, but I would note 2C still has the highest weight per unit effort in the survey in the fishery, and a fairly stable catch per unit effort over time in the fishery going into this year. I'll leave the 2C issues there. I did want to, if I could, ask a question in thinking about how we evaluate the science of what we're looking at this year. I think it would be to Dr. Stewart. It definitely is a concern to all of us that our fishery at this point is so reliant on these 2016, 2017 age classes that after hearing your presentation and the presentation from Dr. Planis, they're less than 50% mature at this time. And it seems that we risk making a bad situation worse by fishing hard on a population of fish that is not yet sexually mature. And I just wondered if you could comment on that, as well as on the possibility of there being some real benefit at this point of backing off and in effect banking these fish for the future, and what those trade-offs might look like.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Ms. Benkin. We are at a case where these fish are just entering the mature biomass. I don't have the percentages off the top of my head, but they're way less than 50%, maybe 10 and 25% for those 2-year classes. And they're also still relatively small. So to the degree that these fish are going to be growing and maturing over the next several years, there will be more yield available from these year classes in a year or 2 or 3 than there is right now. But it's not a huge amount, but that's definitely a consideration, that there would be more yield to be had from these year classes by allowing them to grow somewhat. We don't, of course, know exactly how what their distribution is going to look like. So an action in a particular area may or may not result in more of these year classes in that area in subsequent years.
Could I ask, and could you speak a little bit to your concern about this level of impact or pressure on these fish when they are not yet sexually mature, as far as the rebuilding potential of the stock?
I can, and I encourage you to think back to some of the stuff that Dr. Hicks presented as well. So we know that if we don't have spawning biomass, we won't have any recruitment, and we can all agree on that. But over a broad range of spawning biomass, we don't see a strong relationship between the biomass and the subsequent recruitment. And we saw a similar case in sablefish where the biomass had dwindled to a very low level, and then the recruits occurred, and it wasn't until we had several recruitments in the water that the biomass caught up. So it's not unprecedented across fish stocks for there to be a weak relationship between spawning biomass and recruitment. I think at this point, we don't see that we've passed a conservation flag with the level of biomass, but we are probably as low or as the lowest level that the stock has been at. And because of that, there's just some risk associated with that. We don't know the stock dynamics well below this point. And so I can't quantify that risk for you, but there is a risk there, and we've tried to point that out.
Questions? Commissioner Alderson first.
So maybe 2 questions. Linda, you mentioned a 40% increase, and I'm having trouble. I can find the 20% increase between 2023 to 2025 in the unguided sport, but what years are you taking to say it's gone up 40%?
So the unguided has in 2C, Mr. Alverson, through the chair, has been around 1 million pounds. We saw an increase in 2025 to closer to 1.36, so closer to 1.4, which is close to a 40% increase.
Okay, and then if we reduce the quota by 5%, it goes to 10% for commercial down. Is that a function of this 40%, or is that a function of the way the North Pacific Council designed the program?
Through the chair, Mr. Alverson, so that's a function both of that increase in unguided, which comes off the top, and also that at low levels of abundance, which is where we are, in 2C, the catch sharing plan allocates more to the charter sector than to the commercial. It shifts more that way. So it's sort of a double whammy to the commercial sector in 2C right now.
That better clarifies. Thank you.
Commissioner Yamada.
Yes, Ms. Benkin. A couple questions on the one fish rule. Number one, do you think a letter from the IPHC is going to move the North Pacific Council to take any action? It's been, the council's addressed this several times in the past. It's a political hot potato. Do you think the IPHC writing a letter would move them to take action on this? And number two, is there consensus of, in the commercial fleet to support this move of a one fish rule? Or is it, didn't see many commercial fishermen's letters in the 900 letters that came through. So your comments would be appreciated. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you through the chair, Mr. Yamada. So I would hope that a comment from the IPHC saying this issue has been raised to us, we see this increase, we see what impact, we're hearing what impacts it's having on the charter sector in 2C. They've been loud and clear with those being very significant impacts. We hear the impact it's having on the commercial fleet, and we're hearing from the state of Alaska that the council's the right body to take this up, and we support that. Take it up, do something about it. I mean, I guess I would just say, I would hope it would help to put that back to them. Relative to the one fish bag limit, we understand that the place where it would be under the authority of this body to lower that bag limit is when it's seen as a conservation issue. Certainly all other sectors are conserving right now. And in 2C, we saw a drop this year in that weight per unit effort for the area in the survey, and a suggestion there needs to be more conservation. I think that's the place where I would be focusing on how, at what point do you expect all sectors to conserve? But I do think there's been a big push by the commercial sector at the council level asking for the council. We now have the legislature taking up how we define, instead of using sort of the blunter tool of a one fish limit, how do we really get our arms around the part of that unguided sector where we're seeing the growth, which is this push out to the assisted, unguided, or bareboat charter. Because you can get out from under the very restrictive limits that you've heard about from the guided sport sector here. So if we're not at the point that the IPHC considers it a conservation issue, then let's deal with it where we're seeing the more surgical allocation approach of figuring out how we define and how we manage that bareboat sector.
Thank you.
Ms. Bacon, I have a variation on Mr. Yamada's question. So it sounded like you are requesting that the commission write to the North Pacific Council and advocate that they take action on this issue. Last year, you may recall, we had a regulatory proposal that dealt with a potential localized depletion issue around St. Matthews Island. And the commission at that time requested that the Secretariat communicate the details of that proposal to the North Pacific Council and simply advise the council that the commission considers that action falls under the council's purview more so than the commission. So the commission didn't advocate that the council take action, but rather referred the matter to the council without taking a position on it. Would that be responsive to what you're seeking, or does it not get there?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I expect that would be the more diplomatic approach, and you are probably a better judge of what will be effective. I guess I'm just voicing some of our frustration that we have gone from one body to the next, asking for some action on this before the horse was out of the barn, and now the horse is out of the barn, and we're saying, will somebody please, deal with this? And any information the IPHC can provide to the council that helps to make the case for a management action will hopefully build momentum towards identifying a solution.
Understood. Thank you. Any final questions? No. Thank you for your comments.
The next is Malcolm Milne on agenda item 5.2. So Ian, you might also want to come forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And actually, I'm going to make a few comments, Ian, and then I have a question for you. So, okay, my name is Malcolm Milne. I'm with the North Pacific Fisheries Association. And just to quickly follow on that last thread, our group as commercial fishermen are opposed to the IPHC taking action on the bag limit. But we do want to also encourage the commission to forward that on to their concerns onto the North Pacific Fisheries Management Council, and I hope in the conference board will be able to have a strong statement about that for you guys to pass on or to build on. So that's to sort of answer why we didn't put in an actual individual comment amongst the 900 comment letters. The North Pacific Fisheries Association is extremely concerned about the halibut fishery. We continue to be. Our group has consistently advocated for a precautionary approach to the IPHC catch limits, and we're continue to advocate for that same approach. I'm concerned that we're just chasing our tail down the drain here, it seems like. Slide 34 of Dr. Stewart's presentation demonstrated that the confidence interval of the stock status touches the B20 trigger, goes below the B30, and the confidence level even brushes up against the B20, which we all saw earlier. And I appreciate that we are addressing the depleted and overfishing levels as we discussed last meeting, but I note that we still have not defined an absolute number for those, especially the depleted number as chasing the relative spawning biomass down is concerning, especially since we're touching it with the confidence interval. The Scientific Review Board in SRB 26, and I'm quoting out of that report, noted that the Pacific halibut stock is currently at low biomass levels that may lead to a depleted designation once a definition is adopted. To me, that was a huge red flag coming from the Scientific Review Board. They're independent of our sort of group here. So, I mean, what they said is we may even be in a depleted designation right now. Once we adopt one, we haven't adopted one. I know we're going to work on getting to an absolute number, but we'll see what that ends up being. Dr. Stewart shows the risks on slide 11 of his presentation. The stocks are at or near low time series low, and the low catch levels for the FIS and the commercial fisheries are very distressing to us. And MPFA supports it looking at the thresholds on regional levels, as Mr. Lakaitis suggested, because I understand we have to look at it on an overall coastwide basis, but I think even breaking those depleted levels down by region could be very informative, since we're going where we've never been before with the stock level. So we better start focusing on these certain areas so we don't end up crashing one area that just collapses the whole biomass, in my opinion. So finally, we're concerned with at the survey level, with the survey levels, we're not able to cover all the stations. The FIS is less than desirable, and as our brand new harvest strategy policy states in section 3.5 that alternatively, I'm quoting out of the policy, alternatively, if resources for data collection and analysis are limited to levels less than desired, the commission may choose to set mortality limits lower to account for added uncertainty. So I hope you take that into consideration directly out of the policy there and account for this uncertainty that we're seeing. So what the last thing I wanted to do is to address this slide 11, which I see as a major red light or alarm. So maybe Dr. Stewart could speak to that. It was slide 11, and I asked the secretariat to they could grab that from his
I think it's likely in presentation 12, the projections.
Yeah, slide 11. Oh, I didn't write the presentation. I wrote it down for them before, but that's 29. Well, it was the one that had to do with the drop in the age of the fish that we're seeing in the commercial fishery. So.
Oh, sorry, it was in the other presentation.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I thought I had it teed up, but I failed. So anyway,
we don't necessarily need the slide, but you understand the slide I'm
Mhm.
referring to. So,
Mhm.
so that was to me, that was like a, an engine alarm just went off our check engine light where all of a sudden we were bouncing along at, average age of 14, and then we dropped down to, 12, I think it was. Yeah, that one there. Okay. So that the sidebar on that left there, um, I mean, is that not a major like red flag that something serious is happening here? And I don't know what the time series was before 2000, before that, but can you just speak to that a little bit and maybe why that would, or what you would suggest as far as that would lead to precautionary measures?
I can, and thanks for bearing with us while we got back to the right slide. These guys are good, but
Yep,
if I
they
tell
are.
them the wrong presentation, it doesn't help. So we've added this additional figure this year because this was something that popped up as a new feature in the data. There are multiple considerations when you tend to see a drop in the average age in the catch in a fishery, and often that is a warning flag. If the average age is starting to decline, it means you're targeting younger and younger fish with a fishery. There are other factors in this case that are potentially contributing. One of those is the fact that we have the change in size at age, which is potentially making these fish a bit more available than they might have been in, say, 10 years ago, because they're growing a little bit faster. 8 or 9-year-old fish, if you look back to 2013, 14, and 15, there weren't very many fish at that age, and that was likely or in part because most of those age classes were not getting above the minimum size limit at that point. So that's a confounding factor here. The last thing is that sometimes a lot of young fish is actually good news because it means you have a huge recruitment coming in. But balancing that out in this case, the way we get information on the year class strength is to compare the age structure with the trend information. And because we're not seeing a response in the trend, this suggests that there are a lot of young fish here, but it's not enough to actually be changing that trend. And so that's why we've added this additional information. So I'm not sure I would go as far as to say it's a huge red flag, but it's definitely something that we felt like was worth people's consideration. And it's a pretty noticeable change after the last 20 years of much more consistent average age in the catch.
Great, thank you. That helps a lot. So I'm just urging the commissioners to really take a hard look at the age class that we're fishing on, and make your decisions accordingly. So thank you.
Thanks for your comments. Questions? I have one, Mr. Millen. I don't think I heard you advocate for a specific number for TCY. Do you have any specific recommendations for it?
I don't have a specific number because I can look at that data. I mean, I can look at those decision tables and come up with different numbers every time I look at them. So I'm not going to offer a specific number. I'm just going to urge you to be precautionary.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. The next comment is from Scott Van Vallen in relation to the limit reduction. So Scott, if you could come forward, please.
Hello. Good afternoon, commissioners. My name is Scott Van Valen. I was born and raised in Alaska. I'm a second generation owner of El Capitan Lodge, which has operated in Southeast for 38 years now. I'm also the president of the Prince of Wales Charter Association. I'm here today to say clearly that the guided sport charter sector cannot afford any further cuts to halibut limits or allocation. Recent reductions have already impacted bookings, trip value, and long-term business planning. Continued uncertainty threatens the viability of our guided charter businesses and the coastal communities that depend on us. Guided sport harvest represents a small portion of the total removals, yet the economic value generated by the charter sector in Southeast Alaska exceeds that of the commercial fishery. Further cuts to guided sport harvest will not produce meaningful conservation benefits, but they will cause disproportionate economic harm. The commission's own science shows that biological targets are being met or exceeded. Spawning biomass increased 7% this year, and the 3-year forecast shows continued growth. A 32.7 million pound coast-wide catch limit is conservative, consistent with the harvest strategy policy, and allows spawning biomass to continue increasing. Under the commission's own definitions, we are not in a conservation mode, and management decisions should remain grounded in science, not driven by uncertainty or pressure from any single user group. Simply put, for decades, we've been told we should trust the science. Now it seems we're being asked to set that aside and manage based on opinions tied to localized catch difficulty in the commercial sector. In Area 2C, guided anglers continue to experience approximately 75% catch rate, and we're not seeing the catch difficulty some are describing. I urge the commission to avoid further restrictions on guided sport halibut and to adopt science-based measures that support both sustainable fisheries and sustainable coastal businesses. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thanks, Mr. Van Valen. Any questions? Don't see any. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. And the final person who's signed up is Chris Sporer on agenda items 5.1 and 8.2. So Chris, if you could come forward. Okay. That's all we have, Chair.
Okay, very good. I think that brings us to the end of our long day today. Dr. Wilson, any administrative items?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And just a reminder that the reception starts at 7 p.m. It is in the Evergreen Ballroom at the far end. So if you go to the lobby level, just past the lobby and you go all the way down to the end of the hall. So it will start at 7 p.m. And go until about 9:30. And then we will reconvene here tomorrow in plenary to hear the national reports from the contracting parties. But at the same time, the conference board and PAB are convening also in the Evergreen Ballroom, so next to where you're going to have the reception, and your two meeting rooms are side by side. So again, convening at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Thank you.
And I would just add that we do also have another public comment and question opportunity tomorrow after those national reports. So if you think of more questions or comments, bring them tomorrow. Okay, we'll look forward to seeing you all at the reception this evening. Thank you.